Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto uses magic Sasuke bashing. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Naruto snapped awake quickly in his new apartment, a present from the Sandame since his old one was burned, multiple times, in celebration. One of his most annoying quirks, according to Kyuubi, was his light sleeping habit coupled with intense paranoia if he wasn't back at the cave, and after exactly 7 hours, 58 minutes, and 53 seconds, Kyuubi had a timer on hand to study him. He would awaken instantly, with no signs of him ever being asleep in the first place. It was a pain in the ass for the poor fox plush, as he loved to take naps and sleep in regularly. Of course, he wouldn't dare say anything, for fear that his wonderful ear scratching would be taken away. After taking a quick, ice-cold shower, and putting on an identical outfit to the one he wore the day before, Naruto picked up his Kyuubi doll and headed out of the apartment, his wet hair pulled back in its standard high ponytail. It couldn't have been later than 7:30 in the morning, so most of the village wasn't awake yet, aside from parents of ninja getting their children ready for school. Naruto nearly snorted at the thought. Getting ready for school? They're supposed to be trained killers, and their parents just ask, "What would you like for lunch?" Not offering psychiatric help, should they perhaps show a personality disorder? They must imagine that it's just a quirk, like the Junins tend to have. They must be so proud. The doll, as if sensing his bitterness, seemed to cuddle up into his arms, causing Naruto's attention to divert to scratching the doll behind the ears. He continued to walk down the winding streets on his way to the academy, completely ignoring the odd stares at his attire, or the hate-filled glares at his doll. The Kyuubi, though, was seeing all of it, and decided to speak up to alert Naruto of this. "Brat, people are glaring at me again. I think my attack must have created a sixth sense to anything related to foxes, as they don't even seem to realize your existence, just that there's a Kyuubi doll, and it's in Konoha, so it must be destroyed." Naruto, hearing the soft mumble of his doll, stopped in the middle of the street and looked around. Sure enough, dozens of villagers were glaring at the doll and a few were picking up weapons. The teen sighed, and set the doll on his shoulder before mumbling loud enough for everyone to hear. Idiots can't seem to tell a 1-foot-tall doll from a 100-foot-tall fox. No wonder their village was attacked. If it weren't for the Yondaime, the entire village would have been dead before they had the sense to investigate the lumbering behemoth bearing down on them. Quite a few villagers, upon hearing this, became enraged and approached the boy, their mouths twisted into hateful sneers. "Who are you and why did you bring that thing into our village?" Seeing yet another opportunity to cause discord, Naruto let a malicious chuckle escape his lips, the likes of which Orochimaru could only hope to compare to. "Oh, you don't remember me? I'm absolutely devastated. I'm the demon brat you threw out 12 years ago. Spread the word, I'm sure your council has figured it out by now. And if you mess with my doll again, you won't live to regret it." With that said, he brushed past the growing angry mob, still conversing quietly to his doll, who was giggling quite cutely for an immortal fox spirit trapped within a plush toy. Makes me wonder why that man decided to sacrifice 2 lives to this hellhole. Ah well, the past is the past, and there's nothing I can do to change it. At least I was able to meet Lulu Nichan from the outcome of their stupidity. The fox doll nodded emphatically before stiffening, acting as if it were inanimate again so as not to arouse suspicion. By this time he had made it to the academy, and he entered it with a slight hint of caution. Walking up to the receptionist, he told her he was here to take the exams. He briefly considered turning her into a statue and causing her to be frozen with that ugly snarl on her face for eternity when she saw his doll, before throwing that thought aside. The Sandame may get upset if too many of his populace became full-size lawn ornaments. The woman finally broke out of her staring contest with the, supposedly, inanimate object, and broke out in a charming grin, pointing him off to room 103 to join Iruka's class. As he walked off, a mumble was clearly heard by the receptionist, along with a rather convincing high-pitched whine imitating her speech. The woman sputtered in indignation at how the boy portrayed her, but if she wasn't being completely ignorant, she would have realized he had her spot on. Everyone in Konoha must be bipolar when it comes to foxes. They're all, "Oh, it's so nice to see you. Is that a Kyuubi doll? What is that doing here? Are you going to destroy it? Oh, you're walking away? Well, it was nice to meet you. Person that I don't know, but don't bring that cursed demon trash back here again. In room 103, Iruka was currently trying to silence his class, but failing quite miserably. It was the genin exams today, and so the entire class was giddy with delight. Except Sasuke. He was brooding about how Itachi graduated earlier. He was about to utilize his own secret technique to silence them all when the door opened, causing everyone to snap their gazes to the intruder and quiet immediately. The young man, if the flat chest was any indicator, was quite attractive, though his clothing was a bit off. And, was that a Kyuubi doll on his shoulder? Instantaneous eruption of killing intent from the entire class, sans Sasuke, who was too busy in his own little world to take notice of the newcomer. Sensing the enmity, Naruto strode elegantly up to the desk, and tapped on it to get the teacher's attention off of his doll. "I'm here to take the genin exams? Hokage-san said he'd see if he could make an exception for me, since I was gone for the last 12 years. One Inuzuka Kiba decided this moment to yell, quite loudly. "What? No way are you allowed to take the exams. You weren't ever in the class to begin with." The teen picked up a paperclip off the teacher's desk, contemplated it for a moment, before flicking it over his shoulder and nailing the boy right in between the eyes. "You should learn to be silent when someone is speaking with your teacher." The class broke out into hushed, to them, mutterings about the newcomer. He was steadily building a fan club, if the quiet, to them, squeals were to be considered. He thanked Lulu profusely in his head for giving him that book, as he hadn't been caught by fan people since then. Iruka, after sorting through all the papers on his desk, finally found the note that the Hokage had left him, saw the name of the person he was supposed to allow to take the test, and gasped in shock. Naruto, seeing this, almost snickered. His doll was twitching in anticipation of the absolute disorder his name would cause. Iruka finally regained his composure, and, using his teacher authoritative tone, politely asked him to introduce himself to the class, ensuring that he was going to be taking the exam. This was met with loud yelling of disbelief of a lot of the class, until Iruka silenced them, saying that he had a note from the Hokage. "My name is Naruto. I have forsaken my surname for reasons I'd rather not tell you. My likes, I like to be left alone, and I like my doll. Dislikes, biases, arrogance, and stupidity. Hobbies, fighting, and training. Dreams for the future, I have no dreams." The entire class stiffened at his name, before turning their heated glares on him instead of the doll, making the obvious connection between the doll and the golden-haired teen from the stories their parents had told them about the monster child that had been killed 12 years ago. Perhaps he was back from the dead to gain revenge? That thought caused quite a few to recoil in fear. Naruto was stifling a yawn. His doll was shaking imperceptibly, trying hard not to break down laughing. He pulled it off his shoulder and cradled it in one arm, allowing it to muffle its snickering in the fabric of his sleeve. He glided back to an unoccupied chair in the corner, gazing rather indifferently at the entire class who was staring at him. Iruka broke out of his shock, and started to pass out the paper tests. Outside, 30 minutes after the paper test, Naruto was sure he failed that damn test. He was never good with paperwork, and, in all honesty, really couldn't bring himself to care about most of the questions. Things like general history of a ninja village were rather stupid when you realize that history is created by the winners, bending it to their will, and that entire villages can be wiped out in the course of a few days to a few weeks, completely making history obsolete. Theory on kunai throwing? Who the hell needs a theory on that? The only question that he deemed worthy to be answered was, how was the Kyuubi defeated? He thought his answer would probably cause the teachers to have simultaneous aneurysms. Kyuubi was sealed within a living person, dooming them to a fate of being an outsider within their own home village, to be hated by the very people he was supposed to protect. Not very smart of the village to do that to their savior, The child disappeared at the age of 3, and perhaps he returned 12 years later, without the Kyuubi being sealed within him. They were going out to the practical side of the genin exam, which Naruto had to restrain himself from groaning in despair at the absurdity of it. Illusionary clones? Kunai target practice? Hand-to-hand sparring with a chunin? How the hell are these children supposed to protect themselves with skills like that? They may be his age, but damn, they were quite far away when it comes to skill or even the correct mindset of a shinobi. After calling out all the other students to do their kunai exam, the teacher called Naruto over. The first thing the teacher had realized was that the teen had no pouches for weapons, and pointed it out to him, and most of the class. This caused raucous laughter from most of the genin to be, before his response quickly shut them up. I specialize in wide-scale destruction through powerful elemental techniques. Kunai are worthless to me. If I ever engage into hand-to-hand combat with a kunai, the person I'm fighting damn well better kill me, because that puny knife is not going to help at all unless you hit someone in the heart, throat, or brain. The teacher was dumbfounded at the fact that, not only had a student basically called him and most of the shinobi populace idiots, he also had a damn good reason to. He eventually picked his jaw up off the ground, and told the boy that he still needs to hit the targets. Naruto shrugged, and dropped the plush toy on the ground, raising an arm up. A light purple aura flared behind him, sparkling a little in the morning light, before he sliced his arm through the air. A single word escaped his lips. Thunder. As soon as the second syllable ended, 10 identical white lightning bolts arced from the cloudless sky, slamming down onto each target and causing them to explode from the force. The students stared in awe, and quite a bit of fear, of this newcomer, and the teacher looked ready to wet his pants. Sasuke, well, he was brooding. He wanted that power for himself, and vowed to get it by any means necessary. The golden-haired teen raised a blonde eyebrow at the instructor, scooping up his plush doll in his right arm before turning to face the man, the obvious question being asked. Does that pass for accuracy? Iruka nodded mutely, before ushering the class onto the hand-to-hand combat portion. 30 minutes later, after quite a few students managed to score glancing blows on the teacher, who Naruto could have sworn was going easy on quite a few of the weaker ones, it was finally his turn. He was broken out of his musings of how the clans probably bribed the teachers to let their kids pass when his name was called, and he was set up against the assistant instructor. Mizuki, it seems, had a bit of a grudge against him. Or at least, so he thought by the glare that was nearly burning the grass with its laden hatred and malice. He held onto his doll, not setting it aside for this portion of the exam, and stood his ground. The assistant instructor thought it would be prudent to try to taunt him into attacking first, so he thought of the first thing he could say that would provoke him. What, you're not going to put your doll away for this? Afraid it'll get dirty? The response wasn't one he was expecting. Naruto started laughing a hollow, creepy laugh. It took him a few moments to calm down before he could answer, and his reply turned the tables, provoking the teacher into attacking first. I'm more afraid that if I set it down, it'll hurt you. So I'm doing you a favor by keeping it far away from you. Come at me, if you can. The Chunin snarled at the mockery, his anger heightened by the fact that quite a few of the class were snickering behind his back. He charged at the student, attempting to wipe the non-existent smirk off his face. He threw everything he could at the teen, including a few kunai. Of course, Iruka politely turned his head to ask a question of a student whenever he brought out the weapons, as he, too, had a grudge against the demon. The man was quite hoping that Mizuki would horribly injure the boy, and wouldn't turn down this chance to have it happen. Naruto was dodging everything that Mizuki could throw at him, using his insane flexibility as well as lithe body to avoid most projectiles. He used his unoccupied left hand to deflect every punch directed towards him, and even redirected a few kicks. Mostly, he was just dodging. He sighed in resignation, before asking the teacher, his face completely void of emotion. Are you actually going to hit me, or shall I just end this now? You're making a fool out of yourself in front of your own students. The Chunin snapped, his hands immediately starting to form hand seals for a jutsu, hoping to kill the brat once and for all. Before he could finish the last seal, though, the boy had disappeared in a blur, and his world spiraled into darkness. Naruto stepped away from the unconscious teacher, after having jabbed the pressure point on the base of the neck to knock him out. He really didn't want to go into a battle of techniques with the man, as he might accidentally kill him. For good measure, though, he kicked the downed assistant in the groin, feeling quite satisfied that the man would wake up with one hell of an ache. He turned around to Iruka, who was looking quite aggravated. I beat your assistant in hand-to-hand combat, though I thought weapons and just you were barred. If they hadn't, I would have just knocked him out at the start. Ah well, no harm done, eh? The clipboard was cracking under the pressure that the Chunin teacher's hands had on it. He nodded tersely before telling the class to head inside while he took Mizuki to the hospital to rest. 15 minutes later, classroom. Iruka finally came back to the classroom, to find his newest student, if he could call him that, in an odd situation. He was declining any and all offers of a date, which surprised Naruto that they would want to date him for about 4 seconds before he realized why they were asking. He quickly recognized the daughters of the clan heads in the council, and had to forcefully restrain himself from going over there and killing the rest of them off. The teacher cleared his throat, asking them to come before the class to demonstrate the final portions of the exam. A few tried to show off, namely Kiba and Sasuke, until it was time for Naruto. He stepped forward, and in a completely deadpan tone, asked a rather absurd question. Is this required to pass? I'm a destruction specialist, and I don't know the henge, transformation, the bunshin, clone, or the kawarimi, substitution, techniques, as they are completely worthless to my profession. Iruka nodded, saying that they were completely required to pass the test. The man had to repress an evil snicker when the teen sighed, thinking he was just going to give up, before the response shocked him. Whatever. Do you want me to make illusionary copies of myself that can be dispersed with a single hit, or do you want me to destroy an entire city block in one technique? I'm more than capable than most Junin in combat, yet the genin test is so stupidly easy that the techniques almost never get used, aside from the kawarimi. If I fail the exam, then who cares? I'll just head off to another village that actually has genin tests based on real combat. I wonder if I could beat the Mist's exam. I probably would do better than Zabuza. Iruka started to sputter indignantly, as the Hokage's note had specifically ordered him to pass the teen. Seeing no way out of it, he heaved a sigh and asked the boy to stay after class. The rest of the class was caught between making fun of the genin who couldn't use the 3 required techniques, and awe at the raw destructive power he had. After the rest walked out with their hite-ates, Naruto walked up to the desk and picked one up, before tying it around his left thigh. At Iruka's question of what he was doing, he replied with the utmost truth before disappearing in a swirl of lightning, leaving a resounding boom as he left. I know the Hokage would have forced you to pass me, so just put me as the dead last if you want. I really couldn't care less. I'm being paid to fight and kill people, so any team is fine with me. Later that night, as he returned home from roaming around the surrounding forests, Naruto would discover a squad of Anbu were waiting to question him in his apartment, so he muttered a soft break. 2 Anbu were immediately imprisoned in a large, thick gray boulder. The remaining 2 Anbu tried to attack him, succeeding in immobilizing him by grasping his rather long hair. Their victory was short-lived, as the boy mumbled a soft bio break, encasing his bright golden hair in a thick, green sludge that slipped off the locks and encased the Anbu, before disappearing into thin air. As they looked up and down to figure out what the teen tried to do, they found that their arms and legs were becoming immobilized. To their horror, as they looked down, they saw that their bodies were becoming stone. Naruto walked over to the large boulder, and tapped it, causing it to crack and shatter into a fine dust on the floor, revealing the horrified stone faces of the other 2 Anbu. Getting his battle doll to assist him, he picked them up and headed to the Hokage's office in a swirl of wind. Hokage's office, 9 p.m. The Hokage was just about to leave for the day, sending a hateful glare at the ever-climbing paperwork, when 2 presences made themselves known. Naruto was standing there with his doll, carrying 4 statues that looked suspiciously like Anbu. His obvious question was answered before he could ask it when the boy spoke. They wanted to capture me and bring me in for questioning. They will be this way for the next few hours unless I want to reverse the technique, so either you start telling me right now why you're trying to abduct me from my own apartment, or someone else is able to order the Anbu around. The Hokage was shocked at the accusation, though inside he was hitting himself over and over for asking Anbu to escort him back to the Hokage tower so he could ask him a few things that slipped his mind when they first met. Heaving a heavy sigh, he was about to apologize to the teen when he was cut off again. Don't bother apologizing. It's not your fault that they tried to forcefully bring me here. However, you should finally realize that I'm not well liked at all in this village, and should have either sent a clone, or sent someone you trusted, instead of sending off random Anbu to get me. If they do this again, I promise they'll be brought to your office in bags of gray dust. The Hokage sat back in his chair, rubbing at his temples before speaking. I wanted to ask you a few things that I forgot to ask when you first came here. Can you release them from the technique now? The teen nodded a bit, a pale violet aura flaring around him before the stone seemed to fade away from the bodies of the Anbu, who were still stuck in shock and horror. Naruto turned to address them, and glared heavily. "If you ever try to apprehend me or attack me in my own home, I won't stop turning you to stone. I will kill you in the most explosive way imaginable, like I did to Danzo. Do not let your petty hatred of me get in the way of your jobs. If you wish to continue living, you will leave this office now, before I find a way to permanently alter you on a genetic level." The Anbu glared at him before retreating via Shunshin, seeming to take his warning to heart. Naruto turned back to the Hokage, and sat in a chair. His first words were, "What is it that you needed?" The Hokage stared at the doll, cradled in Naruto's arm, suspiciously once again. He just couldn't get rid of the feeling that that little plush toy had killed off a large section of the village, as well as claimed his successor. He was almost positive the fox had to be influencing the boy's behavior. "I wanted to ask you who that lady was you were talking to before she broke my crystal ball." Naruto, at this, seemed to actually display some form of emotion. His face twisted into a scowl, his glittering purple eyes flashing in rage at the aged man. "She was my caretaker, and the next time you find it prudent to place a chakra tag on me so that you can keep tabs on me, I will destroy every single one of your crystal balls. I do not take being spied on lightly, and if you had that damn tag on me, then why weren't you able to protect me better when I was a child? If my memory serves correctly, quite a few memory techniques were used on me to erase traumatic mob beatings, well over 40 in number. Were you afraid your village weapon would be out of control if you were to grow up in that environment? Feeling oddly regretful that your successor's son was treated in such a way? How could you be so blind as to think I'd live a normal life when I was a Jinchuriki?" The Hokage looked stricken at the teen's well-placed anger, trying hard to come up with a reason for the tag to placate the young man. His mind was awash with regret that he could have, indeed, used the tracing tag to make sure of the boy's well-being at any point in time. But every time he saw the little ball of sunshine he was forcefully reminded of the resemblance to his successor, and couldn't bear to be near it, as it brought up memories of better times. Before he could try to create a solid defense for his actions, the boy was already standing up and heading towards the window. The parting shot sent over his shoulder chilled the Hokage to the bone. "I only serve this village so long as it serves me. I will not be your mindless weapon. I will not emulate my sire and try to protect this village. I will stay so long as it serves my needs, and when that time comes that it tries to control me, as I'm sure it will, I will leave and never look back. Your village is irreversibly corrupted, Hokage-san, and there's nothing you can do about it. And tomorrow, since I have to be at the academy for the team assignments, I need you to pass a message to the council for me. Tell them that I know what they're playing at, and there's no way they can try to breed my bloodline. If they continue these petty attempts, I will enact retribution. Have a pleasant evening, Hokage-san." With that, the boy disappeared, a black hole surrounding him before collapsing, teleporting him away. The Hokage looked well-aged beyond his years, rubbing his temples as he tried to sort out the massive headache coming on. The next day, 7:30 a.m. After waking up instantly and bolting to a sitting position in his bed, which dislodged his soft companion from his resting place on his chest, Naruto set about getting ready for team assignments. After taking a short shower and wearing his standard clothing, he decided to let his hair stay down for the day. It dried quickly as he walked, with 2 long locks of hair framing his face and falling halfway down his chest. Any shorter and they'd start to spike. The Kyuubi doll was currently cradled in both arms, getting simultaneous ear scratching and belly rubs, much to his delight. If he had known that it'd feel this good, he would have agreed to be the teen's doll much sooner, possibly begging to be the doll. Not that he'd ever admit it. The long hair billowing out behind the teen as he strode made for an imposing appearance, causing Kyuubi to snicker a little as he noticed people looking at the teen in shock and awe. It was rather amusing to see fan clubs be born and disbanded at a rapid pace, created at first sight, and then disbanded once their minds caught up with the fact that this was the legendary demon child they were following. A lot of people kept alternating between the fan-person tendencies and the hatred, causing them to have something akin to an epileptic fit upon setting their sights on the young man. Naruto was reminiscing on his time spent with Lulu. He dearly missed the woman, and hoped that she was happy wherever she was. Meanwhile, in the far plane, Lulu was currently watching the TV broadcast of Naruto's life with the rest of the cast of Final Fantasy X. Their first impressions of Lulu's apprentice were quite varied. Kamari looked at him, blinked rapidly, and asked in his unique way whether or not that was really a man. Titus cheered at having found a fellow blonde with fanpeople issues, and started to take notes on the newest way to avoid them. Complete separation from society, coupled with intense hatred. Orin had smirked at the boy, complimenting Lulu on passing on her attitude to an impressionable child. She had replied that at least she hadn't passed on Waka's attitude. Waka was whining about how the teen looked too grumpy, obvious aftereffects of being taken care of by Lulu herself. Yuna had laughed softly, congratulating Lulu on finally finding someone to care for like a son. She also noted that the boy had taken a fashion tip from Lulu's attire, much to the Black Mage's chagrin. Riku had squealed, going starry-eyed at the blonde. That is, of course, until she learned of his attitude and cause of said attitude, and turned her massive flames of feminine fury, patent pending, towards the populace of Konoha. Back to the story. Naruto had finally made it to the academy. He silently glided along the floor, oddly wondering how much better it'd look if he had a dress like Lulu's before shoving that thought out of his mind. He wouldn't look good in that dress, damn it. Men had no cleavage. Kyuubi had whimpered a little as the ear-scratching and belly rubs had ceased, causing the teen to smile warmly at the doll. The action startled the Kyuubi into freezing in place, wondering if it was, perhaps, an imposter. But no, nobody had magic fingers like Naruto, so it had to be the real one. His fears abated, he froze himself in position to look like an inanimate object once more. After stepping into the classroom and making it all the way to the back without being noticed, Naruto sat down and heaved a bored sigh. Iruka rattled off the teams before finally reaching his. Team 7, led by Hitaki Kakashi, will be Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke. At this point a deafening squeal resounded, cracking some of the concrete, and causing the windows to shatter, and Naruto. The final name caused the class to erupt in confusion, before Iruka had relayed the answer he had come up with for just such an occasion. The young man is a genius at demolition, but can't do normal ninjutsu, so he placed him as the dead last with the Rookie of the Year, as well as Kunoichi of the Year, hoping that he'd learn some from them or his Junin sensei. Everyone whipped their heads to stare at the blonde in question, who was having a staring contest with his doll that was placed on his desk. He looked up, feigning innocence, and asked in a polite tone. "What? I don't think most ninjutsu are even worth learning. My bloodline techniques get the job done much more quickly." Half the class snickered, while the other half fell on their faces at this. Iruka hit a slight sneer at the boy, and left the room, saying that the teachers would be in soon. 3 hours later, Naruto was meditating, his doll situated atop his head. Sakura was discreetly, to her, hiding a syringe, waiting for Sasuke to drop his guard so she could acquire some blood for her Sasuke shrine. Sasuke, well aware of the girl's intentions, had moved across the room from her, and was eyeing her suspiciously. This is the scene that one Hitaki Kakashi walked in on. The gray-haired Junin was immensely confused that the Uchiha heir was almost cowering in fear of a pink-haired man who was currently trying to hide a syringe in a not-so-sneaky manner. The final student was one that had most of his attention, none of it positive. The Kyuubi doll perched on his head immediately became subject to one of his famous cyclopean glares, his one uncovered eye beaming waves of hatred at the doll. The golden-haired boy, who he hadn't really paid attention to until now, snapped his gem-like light purple eyes open, and glared right back at the man. Naruto could feel the hatred coming from the doorway, so he immediately had glared at the cause, finding it to be one Hitaki Kakashi, who was supposed to be his sensei. A soft mumble of, "just my luck," later, he picked his doll up off his head and cradled it in his arm, walking up to the man and completely ignoring both Sakura and Sasuke. He regarded the man apathetically, shrugging his shoulders a bit before gesturing his head to the side and asking the most obvious question. "You're our teacher, I take it? Lead the way. Those two will likely be at it for the next 10 minutes, so you can just leave a note for them." Disregarding what his student was saying, he broke up the fight, much to Kyuubi's silent dismay. He wanted the Banshee to succeed, if only so that the Uchiha would feel irreversibly violated. Now he'd just have to wait and pray some snake-like pedophile used his tongue on the boy to achieve the same gesture. Kakashi led them all up to the roof, before asking them to introduce themselves. State your name, likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams, and specializations. His voice was a rather lazy drawl, though Naruto could tell he was actually interested. Or more likely, he was interested in Sasuke. If his memory served correctly, Kakashi had an implanted Sharingan eye, so the council probably bribed him to teach the Uchiha. Sakura looked up from her task of trying to scoot as close to Sasuke as possible, and asked the first question that went through her head. Yep, right on through one ear and out the other. Sensei? I'm still confused, can you go first? Suppressing a sigh that would have inevitably escaped his face mask, he rattled off in the same bored tone. My name is Hitaki Kakashi. My likes, dislikes, hobbies, you're too young to know. Dreams? Here he cut himself off with a perverse giggle before resuming his introduction. Specializations? Ninjutsu and Sharingan use. Sasuke's head snapped up at the last part, wondering how this man had a Sharingan when he wasn't a great Uchiha. Kakashi seemed to realize this and elaborated. I have an implanted Sharingan eye. I can't use it as well as a real Uchiha, such as you, but I still use it well. Pinky, your turn. Sakura huffed at the nickname, glaring at her sensei before starting her own introduction. My name is Haruno Sakura. My likes are, well, the person I like is. She stopped here to send a glance at Sasuke, accompanied by a light blush. My dislikes, Ino Buddha, pig. Hobbies? Here she cackled a little, sending multiple glances at Sasuke, who edged further away from her. Naruto, seeing Kakashi's puzzled stare, decided to elaborate for his sensei. She tries to rape him, and/or gather pieces of his skin and blood to decorate her Sasuke shrine with. The gray-haired Junin snickered a bit at this, and Sakura just glared at the flaxen-haired teen before resuming her introduction. My dreams are. She took a long glance at Sasuke at this, before squealing and blushing a beet red. She finally wrapped up her introduction after a moment. Specializations? I only know the Academy Ninjutsu, so I don't have one. I have good chakra control, though. Kakashi nodded a little, wondering who he could pawn her off onto. Maybe Kurenai? He snapped his attention back to the situation, and nodded a bit at Sasuke, saying, your turn. Sasuke looked up from where he was glaring at the ground, before puffing up his chest and preparing his introduction. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. Here a dramatic wind started blowing through his hair, causing the duck-ass to start to flutter in the breeze, his bangs whipping around. The wind quieted, after Kakashi sent a suspicious glance at Naruto, whose mouth was twitching. The introduction continued. I have no likes, and many dislikes, mainly my fangirls. Sakura, who had heard this as, I love Sakura. I dislike not having Sakura around, and dislike all fangirls besides my Sakura, had squealed out a, I love you too, Sasuke-kun, and had to be apprehended before she could attempt to rape the Uchiha heir. After the interruption was quieted, he continued. Dreams for the future, I don't want to call it a dream. It's more of an ambition, to kill a certain man. Here the dramatic wind blew back full force, a foreign light source shining down on him as if to create a spotlight, which both disappeared when Kakashi glared at Naruto again. I specialize in fire jutsu, and as soon as I unlock my Sharingan, I'll be unstoppable. Finally it was time for Naruto's introduction, and he nodded a little at Kakashi's acknowledgement of, you, with the fox doll. My name, Naruto. Likes? Training, as well as fighting. I also enjoy playing with my doll. Sasuke snickered at this, mumbling about girly dolls. The Uchiha could have sworn killing intent started to emanate from the doll, and shut up. Kakashi glared suspiciously at the doll, wanting a reason, any reason, to destroy it. Dislikes are biases, arrogance, and corrupt politicians, I've newly added. Hobbies. Training, mostly. I meditate a lot, as well. Dreams. I suppose to serve this village until it tries to control me, and then leave, whether by choice or by force. This information shocked the other three, and Kakashi's hand started to slowly go for his kunai pouch. Specializations? Wide-scale destruction, animating objects with no life, and I can do well in hand-to-hand combat. The second point was the last straw for the Junin, who lunged at the doll, believing it to be the Kyuubi incarnate if his student was able to animate it. Before he could attack the doll and rip its stuffing out, he was struck in the chest by a palm thrust from the boy, sending him back to his seat. The boy continued on, as if adding an afterthought to his introduction, completely ignoring the fact that he had just struck his teacher. I also get highly annoyed at people who think to take out their completely irrational fear and hatred on my doll. After regaining his composure, Kakashi told them to meet him at Training Ground 7 at 6 a.m. the next day, and asked Naruto to stay behind. The teen complied, scratching that special spot behind the fox doll's ears as he waited for the inevitable question or possible attack from his new teacher. Said teacher was still glaring, hand just itching for the chance to destroy the accursed doll. He finally brought his mind back to the present, and spoke. Naruto, you and I need to go meet with the Hokage about this. The boy just smirked, waving the man off with an indifferent tone to his voice. Whatever, Hitaki-san, you go do that. I'm going back to my apartment. The Junin lunged forward, grabbing the boy by the shoulder and used Shunshin to teleport to the Hokage's office. As soon as they were there, he was subject to one of the coldest glares he had ever received in his life. Don't ever touch me again, Hitaki. In fact, for deliberately attempting to not only to attack my possessions, as well as your completely idiotic suspicions, you're going to enjoy what it's like to be prey. Toad. With the spoken word, the Junin felt himself shrinking, his clothing melding into his body as he disappeared in a poof of green smoke. When the smoke disappeared, he realized he was quite smaller than before, and there was a nine-tailed fox plush toy that was walking towards him, threateningly. Releasing a scream of instinctual terror, which came out as more of a ribbit, he hopped around the Hokage's office trying to escape the evil plush toy. Said fox plush was having the time of his life. He was able to terrorize some stupid ninja in his plush form. The brat really should let him do this more often. Naruto turned to the Hokage and the two council members who were currently in the office with him. The council members were caught between glaring at him, glaring at the doll, and showing off smug smirks. The Hokage was looking weary and slightly amused as the small frog was chased around by a fox plush. Finally the Hokage spoke. Naruto, could you change Kakashi back? I think he might have learned his lesson by now. I was actually just about to send a clone to get you, as these two council members have something to discuss with you about. Naruto, who had caught the pause on the word discuss, shrugged uncaringly and twitched a finger, causing Kakashi to revert to his human form, looking panicked. The Kyuubi plush doll got the last hit in, however, by biting viciously on the man's crotch, causing him to let out an unmanly shriek of pain before fainting. Naruto crouched down on the floor, holding out his arms and smiled as the fox toy jumped into them, giving the fox some well-deserved belly scratches for a job well done. He looked over at the two elderly council members, who were now caught between glaring at him, and seeming to wonder how he dare attack a ninja in the Hokage's office. They finally resorted to their smug smirking, before opening their mouths to speak. Naruto-san, the Honorable Council has come to a decision that you are to be graced with the honors to tutor young Uchiha Sasuke in your techniques, so that he may succeed in killing his brother who murdered his clan. Naruto looked at them, and blinked rapidly, before looking down at his doll. Said doll started yipping in laughter, and was rolling across the floor. Naruto looked back up at them, over his shock at the stupid order, before glaring at them. I told you this before. I will not allow you to control me. Consider this a warning, and enjoy your life as statues for the next 8 hours. Break. The two were encased in a thick gray stone, before the stone dispersed in a gray cloud, leaving only two rough stone statues of their exact features standing there, looking horrified at the sensation of being petrified. Naruto looked over at the Hokage, who was once again shocked at how blunt the boy was being. If they ever try that again, they'll die a horrible death. When Hitaki-san wakes up, tell him that he has also been warned, and that he should never threaten my doll again. The flaxen-haired young man then disappeared in a pillar of stone that shot out of the floor, leaving no trace as it receded, not even broken floorboards. The next day, 9 a.m., Naruto appeared in a swirl of fire, surprising both his teammates, as well as his sensei that had joined them only a moment before him. He glared at the golden-haired teen, which looked just about the same as the day before, though he could swear the fox doll perched on his head was smirking victoriously at him. He explained the bell test, and pulled out an alarm clock, setting it for noon. After a rather unimpressive display of fangirlism from Sakura, who fainted at the genjutsu image of Sasuke near death, as well as a heated barrage of weaponry and jutsu from the Uchiha, who he let grab the bell, as he had to pass the boy either way. Kakashi was looking for his final student, hoping to tear the toy limb from limb for what had happened the day before. He found the boy leaning against a tree, the fox doll curled up at his feet. The Junin blurred into action, throwing a barrage of kunai and fire jutsu at the accursed plush toy. Unfortunately, all actions were halted by a thick lightning bolt arcing through all the metal weaponry and causing them to embed into the ground. The fire jutsu were halted by a wave of water that appeared out of thin air, evaporating into a thin mist. Naruto finally opened his eyes from his meditation, glaring a bit at the man. "I told you not to try to destroy my doll, didn't I?" The man glared in reply, angry that not only had a genin stopped his assault, but that doll seemed to be mocking him. "I don't care. It needs to die, as it looks just like the Kyuubi." Naruto broke out into a humorless laugh, stretching a bit. "So anything that has any sort of relation to the fox, inanimate object or no, has to be destroyed? Your blind hatred sickens me, Hitaki. In fact, I won't even fight you. I'll let my doll fight you." Naruto sent a surge of mana through the doll, allowing Kyuubi much more reign on his actions as it sped forward, reaching near Junin speeds. Kakashi had to swiftly dodge as the tails whipped around maliciously, attacking near his ankles. He was unable to fight back, as the toy was too close to him to use jutsu, and weaponry might impale his feet instead. He finally was backed up against a tree, and the toy actually laughed at him, before it spoke in a deep, growling baritone. "Looks like you fail, Hitaki-san." The doll lunged forward, knocking him to his knees with powerful strikes of its fluffy tails to the backs of his knees, before head-butting the man in the groin with excessive force. Kakashi fainted from the pain, falling face first onto the ground. Naruto simply walked up, grabbed the remaining bell, and tied Kakashi to the post. 2 hours later, the bell finally rang, waking Kakashi from his unconscious state. The first thing he noticed was the horrible aching pain in the area of his precious, as well as the ropes binding him to the training log. He opened his one eye and saw that all 3 of his students were staring at him. Sasuke was holding a bell, Naruto was holding his beloved first edition director's cut Icha Icha Paradise, signed by the author, and Sakura was holding the other bell. Naruto's voice broke through the silence. "We all pass, or else your book gets it." Fearing for his adult literature, he quickly agreed. Sasuke and Sakura started to walk away, Sakura momentarily contemplating whether or not to untie her sensei, but that notion was disregarded as it would cut into her Sasuke time. Naruto stood in front of him, Kyuubi doll perched atop his head as he stared at the book, contemplating. "Well, since you can't hold your own against one of your own genin students, I believe you need to train, and this book would only distract you." With that said, the book went up in a small burst of blue fire. Naruto disappeared in a swirl of mist, expertly avoiding the impending doom. The peaceful noontime sky was split with the echoing roar of, "Not my Icha." Kakashi surged against his bonds, fueled by the one force rivaling that of feminine fury, perverted novel in danger adrenaline rush, something not dissimilar to the surge of strength a woman gets from seeing her child in trouble. He broke from his bonds, sobbing brokenly over his beloved book's ashes, and vowing vengeance on its killer. He was certain he could get revenge, as he was now the teen's Junin sensei, and was sure he could get him killed on a mission. 5 months later, after multiple attempts on his life, due to Kakashi forcing him to carry Tora the cat around, Naruto was fed up and he was going to do something about it. If the man wanted him dead that bad, why not get a C-rank mission? At least he could kill something. As he entered the Hokage's office and handed the accursed cat off to its owner, the fire daimyo's wife, he realized why it hated her so much. He decided to voice his concerns, as he was an experienced caretaker of a fluff ball as well. "Lady, you may want to let up on your grip. You're causing the cat a bit of pain, which is probably why it keeps running away." The woman looked shocked for a moment, before regarding her cat with an inquisitive eye. Sure enough, it was mewling pathetically in pain as she squeezed it hard against her bosom, and she had an epiphany. "Thank you for your advice, young man. Hopefully now my precious Tora won't run away from his cousin anymore." Her statement, coupled with his, caused everyone in the room to nearly faint in shock. As she left the room, carrying a now happy Tora, they were brought out of said shock. Sakura was the first to speak, yelling at Naruto for disrespecting the fire daimyo's wife by addressing her that way. He simply replied that, if she wants my respect, then she can take care of Tora better than that. The Hokage started to list off the different D-ranked missions they currently had in stock, before Naruto finally snapped. Hokage-san, either you give this team a C-ranked mission, or your stash of literature will be burned to a crisp. I know exactly what drawer it is in, and I'm sure you want to keep it safe. The Hokage looked up, startled. He didn't think the boy would be ruthless enough to endanger his poor Icha. Sure, he did it to Kakashi, but agree to the mission, or the crystal ball also gets it, arrow cage. At this, the Hokage was absolutely positive the boy was dead serious. He wouldn't threaten his crystal ball otherwise. Kakashi, Sakura, and Sasuke were all a mixture of confusion at the literature and crystal ball comments, and indignation that he dare speak to the Hokage without proper respect like that. Just before Kakashi was going to reprimand him for his disrespect, the Hokage spoke. I'll allow it. This is a C-ranked escort mission to protect a bridge builder while he finishes a bridge in Nami no Kuni, Country of the Wave. Said bridge builder entered the room at this point, looked around, and loudly declared that the girly boy with long hair would be unable to protect him. Unfortunately, Naruto was already treading on thin ice with his temper and launched a barrage of lightning bolts, fireballs, a few blades of wind, and whips of water at the man. He would have continued with large chunks of earth next, but the man recovered from the shock at the utter destruction the girly boy had caused to the walls surrounding him, as Naruto wasn't going to kill him, yet he really wanted this mission, damn it, and not even a stupid old man was going to sabotage it. Sasuke was brooding. He wanted Naruto's power to kill Itachi. His thoughts kept repeating that over and over into a mantra, as it was what made up about 80% of his thought processes. The other 20% was made up of equal parts, duck-ass hairstyle, hating fangirls, not training because I am an Uchiha, and Uchiha arrogance. Sakura was deathly afraid of the boy's temper, not wanting to aggravate him more as the techniques he was lashing out with would totally ruin her hair. How was she supposed to seduce Sasuke-kun if her hair wasn't absolutely perfect? And how dare Naruto have such great natural hair? Kakashi was glaring maliciously at the blonde, vowing that he'd get his student killed in an unfortunate accident. He was sure there would be something that could happen on this mission to somehow kill the boy off, and allow him to train the Uchiha in peace. West Gate, 6 a.m. Tazuna had arrived at the time specified during the meeting to see the same long-haired blonde teen from yesterday having a staring contest with a nine-tailed fox doll. Said fox doll was being held by the teen right in front of his face, so that neither of them could miss the other blinking. Tazuna briefly considered calling the boy crazy, but after the events of yesterday, he'd rather not agitate him. The blonde finally broke away, muttering a soft, damn, and sat against a nearby tree. He gave a slight wave to Tazuna as the bridge builder walked up. Hey there, Tazuna-san. I'm not sure when my teammates will arrive, but I'm pretty sure Hitaki-san will be about 3 hours late, so I hope you have something to occupy your time. With that said, the blonde closed his eyes in meditation, the fox plush perched on top of his head. The bridge builder was shocked that the Junin would be 3 hours late, but guessed it was a ninja thing. So he pulled out a copy of Icha Paradise and started to read to pass the time. Every now and then, though, he could swear he felt something staring at him, but brushed it off as a ninja village thing. Finally the feeling became intolerable, and he looked up from his book to find whatever was staring at him. To his shock, however, nobody was around. Just him and that meditating blonde with the fox doll. Said fox doll was staring in his general direction, but since it was a doll, it wouldn't be the cause of the feeling, would it? Nah, must be some hidden ninjas somewhere. He went back to reading his book. A few seconds later the feeling intensified, and he looked around warily. He still only saw the doll staring at him. He was starting to get a little creeped out now. Later, 6:30 a.m. Tazuna was staring to become a nervous wreck. He was absolutely sure that doll was staring at him, but it was just a doll, right? But every time he looked away, it seemed to flick its tails in a menacing manner, but when he looked back at it, it was still. He was starting to sweat a little, wondering if it was really a good idea to come to a ninja village for help. This was the scene Sasuke and, by proxy, Sakura, arrived at. Tazuna, staring at the doll perched on their teammate's head, and shaking like a leaf in a gale, sweating buckets. Sasuke shrugged, uncaring, and started to brood. Sakura was a little worried about their client, and asked him what was wrong. He had answered, in a whisper, afraid the doll would hear, that he could swear the plush toy was alive. Sakura had completely forgotten Naruto's introduction speech, as her mind had deemed it not pertaining to Sasuke, and discarded it. The teen also didn't like to animate the doll around Konoha people, as it would probably make them form a mob to attack him, making him take precious time out of his day to thwart the attack, so he only used it to taunt Kakashi when nobody else was looking. She told the man that it was a plush doll, and to quit worrying about it, before trying to coax Sasuke into a date, as this man had taken up all her scheduled non-Sasuke time. Naruto, who had heard this from deep within his meditation, almost snickered. Kyuubi was a devious little fox, always playing pranks on people, and he wouldn't have it any other way. He murmured softly, just loud enough for the doll to hear him, before deepening his meditation, focusing hard on the mana flowing through him, and working on controlling it so that the spells didn't require as much to get the desired effect. Good work, Kyuubi-kun. I like the way you work. The doll gave a toothy grin, completely scaring the bridge builder out of his wits when he saw that the doll was grinning. Plus, he looked to have sharp teeth, for a cuddly toy. The fox didn't really mind the suffix to his name, but only Naruto could call him that, and only if he got belly scratches. He'd been paired with the teen for so long that he'd grown a little attached to the boy, quite liking how the blonde shared his love of fighting and sadism. The fox licked his lips tauntingly at the bridge builder, causing him to go into the fetal position, muttering about evil dolls coming to get him. Poor man, he'll probably lose years off his life if he stays that stressed. 2.5 hours later, Kakashi arrived in a puff of smoke, to see the bridge builder rocking back and forth in a fetal position, mumbling about evil dolls plotting his demise, and that he really wasn't crazy. Sakura was staring at Sasuke with a mixture of stars and hearts in her eyes, and salivating like a dog for a bone. Sasuke was glaring at his third student, and you could almost feel the thoughts of, "I want that power," coming off of him. His final student, well, he was playing? Indeed, Naruto was molding raw elements, and playing with them in an elaborate game of toy soldier. He had very detailed human golems created out of the ground, and they were all running in fear, with realistic shrieks of despair. He had created a clone of his Kyuubi doll out of fire, and had it barreling down upon the poor earth golems with a squeaky roar, tearing them apart. Lightning and wind were combined together with water to create small thunderclouds above the battleground, with realistic weather effects. Naruto had the real Kyuubi plush on his head, and he was cackling maniacally as the flame Kyuubi destroyed the poor earth people. Kakashi coughed to get attention on him, telling them it was time to head out. Naruto shrugged, the elemental battleground dissipating into thin air, with only scorches on the grass to denote lightning strikes and the places where the flame Kyuubi had rampaged. The blonde stood up slowly so as to not dislodge the plush from his head, and shouldered a small backpack with changes of clothing in it. Sasuke headed over as well, a considerably larger pack on his back filled with clothing, food, and extra supplies. Sakura was struggling under the weight of her own pack. It wasn't a large pack, by any means, but it was full to the brim with makeup, accessories, clothing, hairbrushes, combs, and a little bit of food. She felt like she needed to diet to have better chances of attaining her Sasuke-kun. As they all grouped together in a loose defensive formation, they walked out of the west gate at a civilian's pace, walking through the forest. A few hours later, they were keeping up a decent pace. Naruto was half asleep on his feet from absolute boredom. Sakura was sweating as she tried to not pass out, and Sasuke was even running out of things to brood about, when a rather conspicuous puddle was spotted along the road. Naruto, not able to feel any real water in the puddle, immediately recognized it was a genjutsu to hide ninja in, and had to try extremely hard to stop himself from breaking out in evil cackles. Sakura was currently too busy trying to turn, sweating profusely from slight workout, into an attractive look to catch the eye of Sasuke, who was glaring up at the sky, as if willing his Uchiha might to make the sun stop shining, as Uchihas were never supposed to tan. Kakashi seemed to be the only other one who spotted the puddle for what it was, and Naruto had to stifle a groan. Didn't they teach them anything in the academy? So far I only see basic projectile throwing, illusionary clones that can't do anything besides distract, the ability that most 5-year-old ninja children have of using the henge, transformation, as well as the standard kawarimi, substitution, that all nins learn. What were they doing for all those years? Kakashi, still trying to get his blonde student killed, had tapped Sasuke on the shoulder and whispered in his ear about the true nature of the puddle, hoping that the Uchiha would back away and let his teammate fight the nins hiding in the puddle without him. This was, of course, a decent plan. Too bad he didn't take something into mind when creating it. Sasuke always had to prove he was the best, and he couldn't prove he was the best if he wasn't fighting, therefore Sasuke would be fighting. The group had just passed the puddles up by now when the two nins attacked from hiding. Their weapon of choice was an odd one. They both had a single gauntlet, placed on the opposite arm from the other. The one on the left had the gauntlet on his right hand, and the one on the right had his on his left. The gauntlets had wicked-looking spikes protruding from the front, and if the purple substance was any indicator, they were also poisoned. The two weapons were connected by a linked, razor-sharp chain that they threw around Kakashi and pulled, instantly separating the man into 6 different pieces. The trauma of seeing her teacher die caused Sakura to scream in horror and freeze up. Sasuke had tensed a bit, as the man was supposed to help him with his Sharingan, damn it, and now he was dead. He blamed Itachi, though, so all was well. Naruto was glaring at a spot in the forest, silently contemplating if he could blast his teacher's hiding spot and claim he died defending the team from Nuke Nen, missing Nen. His thoughts about killing his teacher were interrupted, however, as Sasuke charged at the two Nen with a kunai in his hand. He had pinned the links of the razor chain to the trunk of a tree by sinking a kunai, followed by a shuriken, into one of the connecting links, forcing the two to disconnect the chain to fight effectively. He was able to get in a few good punches and kicks, though his weapon was knocked away immediately. Kakashi was just about to intervene when he realized that Sasuke wasn't going to win this when Naruto decided to join the fight, as he was starting to get itchy to finally fight something. Shifting his doll to his left arm, he raised his right hand up to his face, a slight purple aura enveloping him, before shoving his hand forward into a palm thrust in the air as if attacking an imaginary enemy. A single word escaped his lips before results were shown. Arrow. A gust of concentrated wind slammed into the two brothers with hurricane force, heaving them bodily up into the air as the wind started to circle them, ripping through clothing and slicing at exposed flesh, before slamming them both into a tree, instantly knocking them out. Both unconscious nins were bleeding heavily from the wind-inflicted wounds, though they wouldn't die. Sasuke was glaring heatedly at his blonde teammate for stealing his spotlight, and Sakura was still too horrified about her teacher's death to do anything. Tazuna realized that, indeed, the girly one was the most powerful of all three, and he would do well not to speak of his appearance again. Kakashi finally appeared in front of both Naruto and Sasuke, shocking both the Uchiha and his pink-haired parasite, as they had truly thought he was dead. Naruto, however, just snorted at the man before asking his question. "What, you're too lazy to fight, too? It's bad enough you're too lazy to train us." The gray-haired Junin glared at him, before turning to Sasuke with an eye smile, and praising his work. "Good job, Sasuke and Sakura, defending the client like that. Naruto, why didn't you step in sooner? Sasuke could have been hurt in close combat with those two." The blonde blinked at the man, before looking at his doll, as if asking the plush for reassurance that his teacher really did ask that question. Finally he looked back up at the man, his amethyst eyes staring at him in mock disbelief. He answered, his voice dripping mockery and sarcasm, though still giving the Junin a rather good excuse. "What, you wanted a demolition specialist to attack targets within close quarters of the Uchiha heir? Are you mad? I could have killed him. I really should have done that instead, now that I put it that way." The last part was mumbled to his doll, not allowing anyone else to hear it. The plush toy snickered a little, and nodded its head before becoming motionless again. Kakashi verbally interrogated their client, until he finally broke down and came clean that he was being targeted by an extremely wealthy man who didn't want the bridge to be built. He finally resorted to trying to guilt-trip the team, which caused Sakura to tear up at his story, Sasuke to start to brood, and Naruto was yawning boredly. When asked if they wanted to continue the mission, it was the blonde who spoke first. I want to finally get a challenge sometime or another. It gets boring when I'm not pushed to my limit. Sasuke agreed next, as he wanted to show up the black mage at his own game, and he wanted to prove his Uchiha superiority to the blonde who, apparently, wasn't affected by the mere mentioning of his last name like most of the village. Sakura was deathly afraid of going into combat again, but as soon as Sasuke agreed, she agreed too, as it would let her spend more time with him, and she was sure Sasuke would come to save her if she was in trouble, right? Let's let her continue dreaming. They continued on their way, crossing the sea that separated Nami no Kuni from Fire Country. While they were on the boat, they got to see the unfinished bridge, which had Sakura staring in awe of its size, Sasuke glaring at it as if daring it to try to get more respect than him, and Naruto to blink at it, before wondering why they built it so high up from the water, since the sea was quite calm here year-round. No need for 40-foot elevation when you could do just as well with 10-foot. They finally reached Nami no Kuni, and the boat disembarked to head back to the other side. They continued walking towards their client's house, though Naruto was starting to get this itching feeling that something was going to happen. 2 hours later, they were almost to their client's house, and a heavy mist was rolling in. Since it was early in the afternoon, it was quite obviously a ninja's work. Naruto knew this, as well as Kakashi, but Sasuke and Sakura. Sakura was worrying about what the mist would do to her hair. Sasuke was trying to glare at the mist for blocking out the sunlight when he, an Uchiha, couldn't do so. Naruto just shrugged, hoping that whoever caused the mist would off the two. Of course, he knew they'd live, just because Kakashi would save them, but he could have his own hopes and dreams, damn it. He started to give his Kyuubi doll some belly scratches as he waited for whoever created the mist to finally attack. It only took a few more minutes for the creator of the mist to finally show himself, as a whirling slab of metal spun through the air, the sound muffled a bit by the mist. Kakashi and Naruto, however, heard it. Kakashi from extensive training, as well as participating in the Second Shinobi War, and Naruto, because he had to train his ears to learn when Lulu Wanichan would test his reflexes by using whispered thunder spells, making him learn how to dodge an ambush. It took 4 months and several thousand lightning-induced burns, before he could finally hear her whisper the spell and jump away. Kakashi's yell of, "Get down!" broke him out of his reverie, and he back-flipped over the giant sword, holding his doll close to his chest to avoid dropping it. As he landed softly on the ground, he saw the owner of the sword standing on the hilt of it, as the blade was buried deep within a tree trunk across the clearing. The man was pretty tall, and had to be quite strong to heave around the heavy Zanbato on a daily basis. The most notable things about him were the scratched mist Hide-8, his black and white camouflage pattern leg and arm warmers, as well as the mask of bandages covering the bottom half of his face. The man seemed to be grinning, if the creases near his eyes were any indicator, as he spoke in a rough voice. Sharingan no Kakashi, no wonder the demon brothers failed. Naruto failed to stifle a snort of derision at that, prompting the Nuke Nin to look in his direction. "What are you laughing at, Blondie?" Naruto blinked at the man, before looking over at Kakashi who seemed to be contemplating ways of getting Naruto killed against the man. Might as well make it easier for him. Hitaki ditched us to observe in the foliage. I'm hard-pressed to think that he'd fight hard for anything aside from his beloved porn novels. The ex-Kiri Nin looked slightly shocked at this, before glancing at Kakashi who was scratching the back of his head sheepishly. He broke out into loud laughter, pulling the sword out of the tree and advancing on the group. Did he? Well then, let's see if he tries to fight a little harder when his team's life is at stake. Naruto tapped an index finger against his chin as he started to think about it, and placed the Kyuubi doll on top of his head before he stepped forward. Actually, I believe he's trying to get me killed, and I'm getting really bored of his pathetic attempts. Plus, I've wanted a challenge for a while now, what do you say? Up for a one-on-one water fight? I haven't had a good challenge in those for ages. The mist swordsman blinked in surprise at the teen, before laughing even louder this time. You? Fight me? You're just a genin. Naruto shrugged his shoulders uncaringly, raising an arm up to his face and flaring his mana as he prepared a spell. Suit yourself, then, I'll go first. Watera. 3 thick columns of water shot from around him, one on either side and one from in front of him, all speeding towards Zabuza. The Kiri Nin was quite shocked at the teen's ability, as he seemed to have pulled the water out of the air itself. Only years of experience allowed him to dodge the pummeling columns of water, as they created 3 matching deep craters in the ground where he once stood. He jumped back onto a lake to the side of the clearing, rapidly going through hand seals before calling out his jutsu. Suiten. Bakusu Shuha. Water element. Exploding water shockwave. A large wave of water barreled down on the genin team, who all but one jumped out of the way, with Kakashi taking Tazuna with them. Naruto stood in the clearing, gazing impassively at the wave as it came towards him. He channeled pure mana through his hand and seemed to backhand the air in front of him. The wave, being the target of the manipulation, crashed earthward, the main force being deflected away from him. Zabuza was quite shocked, as he really thought the genin would just be ridden off and killed immediately. He started to grin, however, as he realized that this teen might pose a challenge to him, something that only Haku seemed to be able to do lately. "What do you know? It seems you do have talent. What's your name, boy?" Naruto gave a slight smirk, raising his arms above his head as his doll sprung to life, scaring the shit out of the bridge builder who had finally managed to convince himself that the doll was inanimate. Sakura and Sasuke were currently too busy fawning and brooding over power, respectively, to notice. A light purple aura flared around the blonde, his hair starting to lift into the air from the energy he was accumulating. "Naruto. My name is Naruto. Prepare yourself. Waterga." Both arms slammed downward, the doll on his head mimicking his actions with his tails as the water all around the teen sprung to life. A gained globe of water arose from the surrounding area, the insides churning and twisting before it exploded in Zabuza's direction, carrying a crushing force as the agitated water surged towards the mist nen. The ashen-skinned man jumped to the surrounding trees to avoid the water as it crushed the surrounding landscape, leveling over a dozen trees in its wake. He barely was able to avoid being caught in the spell, having jumped over it from the treetops. His hands were already starting to form a new jutsu as he descended, calling out as he touched down on the calmer waters behind the surge. "Suiten. Suiryuden. Water element. Water dragon." Gathering the water literally flooding the clearing, the jutsu forced it into a roughly dragon-like shape. The water dragon twisted and twined around Zabuza, before coiling up and springing forward, aimed directly for Naruto. The teen in question looked vaguely interested in the jutsu, before he shrugged and raised his right hand, lowering it in a swift chopping motion, augmented with his magic. As the water dragon neared him, it split cleanly down the middle to hit either side of him, leaving him unharmed. The swordsman's jaw nearly dropped as he witnessed the feat, one only replicated by his own apprentice. His shock didn't last long, however, as the boy swiftly retaliated. "A pity. It was an interesting technique, but I believe it's time to end this." With that said, the doll jumped off his head and onto the dry ground directly in front of his feet, its tail swirling and flicking as the boy started to cast an even more powerful spell. The violet aura darkened, wind swirling around the teen as the energy was gathered. Globules of water formed out of the air and rose from the water of the clearing, accumulating just above the blonde. In less than 3 seconds later, the water from the entire clearing had formed into a massive blob of water above the teen's head, over 30 feet in diameter. It lowered itself in front of the boy's body, hiding him from view as a shout broke the shocked silence. "Waterja." The blob of water exploded forward, forming a 40-foot-tall tidal wave that was easily 20 feet across. It descended towards the swordsman, who was too shocked to even move out of the way of the technique, and slammed downward on top of him. The pulverizing force of the wave sent him flying through the air, and slammed him against a tree trunk, where 3 senbon needles embedded into his neck. Naruto, his lust for a challenge finally sated, let the spell refill the drained lake, as well as disperse back into the air to replace the missing water molecules. A hunter nin jumped from the tree line, and picked up the corpse of Zabuza, thanking them, before leaving in a swirl of mist. Kakashi was both frightened and frustrated by his third student for multiple reasons. Firstly, he had shown exactly why he was a demolition specialist, and could probably even kill him. Secondly, the boy had just taken on an A-class nuke nin and not only lived, but only seemed to be only slightly winded from the massive elemental manipulation he pulled off, without hand seals. And finally, he was frustrated because the teen didn't die, and that his Sharingan couldn't copy those techniques. It was as if chakra wasn't even flowing through the boy at all when he used his abilities. Sasuke's face was shadowed by his hair as he glared heavily at the ground below him. Why? Why must he be so weak? Why did the Dobi of the class have so much power when he, an Uchiha, did not? It didn't make sense. Finally, a thought broke through his angst. What if he got the team to teach him? Surely he could use those techniques better than the Dobi could? He nodded to himself. He would simply have the boy teach him, and then he would kill Itachi. Sakura, well, she didn't pay attention to the fight at all. She was too busy staring at Sasuke. Tazuna was pointing at the doll that was now in the boy's arms, unable to form a coherent sentence. Mainly words like, doll, alive, not crazy, and, out to get me, could be heard, though the doll in question was currently motionless. Of course, since Sasuke was too busy brooding about his teammate's power, he didn't notice the doll had moved during the fight, and Kakashi refused to say anything about the plush toy, too annoyed that he had lost a fight to it previously. Poor Tazuna. Naruto walked back to his team, looking almost, slightly, happy? Nah, must be a trick of the light. The only odd things after the fight that struck most people were that his hair was back into place as if it hadn't just floated behind him when he was fighting, and that he was completely dry while most of the ground was muddy and squishy from the extensive water fight. Sakura was doing an impressive imitation of Sasuke's angst as she grumbled mentally about his hair, while inner Sakura raged against the situation. Damn him and his perfect hair. Shinaro, how did he get his hair to be like that? It's better than ours. Crazy banshees with split personalities aside, the blonde simply cocked his head to the side, and asked in a mocking innocent tone. What? Kakashi just sighed in frustration, while Sasuke thought about how to approach his teammate on getting him to train him, and Sakura brooded on his perfect hair. Tazuna was shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, still pointing at his doll. Slightly annoyed at the silence, the teen spoke up again. Shall we continue on to Tazuna's house now? The bridge builder nodded a bit, before walking ahead of them, casting glances over his shoulder at the doll in the teen's arms that he could swear was smirking at him. On the way to Tazuna's house, Sasuke finally reached a decision of how to get his teammate to train him, and spoke. Dobi, train me. Yes, he had spent quite a few minutes wondering how he could get his teammate to train him, and 3 words were all he came up with in a rude, short, sentence. Truly a modern wonder, given his awesome mental prowess. The blonde blinked in slight surprise, saw the almost smug glint in Kakashi's eye, and gave the same response he gave to the council members back in Konoha. No. If you want training, get our teacher to do it. Don't bother me with your petty revenge kick. Sasuke fumed, turning to give the blonde the full force of his patented Uchiha death glare and asked. Why won't you train me? Naruto struck a thinking pose, placing the doll on his head as he narrowed his eyes as if viewing into the distance, an index finger tapping his chin. After staying that way for quite a few minutes, in which the remaining group had stopped to watch, he seemed to reach a decision, and gave the Uchiha his answer. I don't want to. Sasuke nearly exploded in fury at this statement, as everyone wanted to train an Uchiha. Clearly, the blonde must have not heard of the clan's greatness, and was about to explain just why the Uchiha clan was so great when the blonde elaborated his answer. My techniques are personal, and I refuse to teach anyone else how to use them. Don't even try stealing them with that thieving eye technique of yours either. My bloodline allows me to use them without hand seals, meaning you couldn't replicate the effects without years of trial and error. Kakashi's eye narrowed in suspicion at this supposed bloodline of his. Nobody was able to get around the power of the Sharingan. The only technique that was unable to be copied was the Rasengan, spiraling sphere, as it was pure chakra manipulation. But this boy didn't even use chakra, or else his eye would have seen it. His mind entertained the thought of his student using Yuki, demon energy, to use the techniques, and started to believe his student was the Kyuubi, not the doll. He turned his head to glare at the blonde as they continued on to Tazuna's house. If the boy wouldn't teach Sasuke willingly, then he would force him. They finally reached Tazuna's house, with both Sakura and Sasuke in the middle of an internal angst rant about different parts of their blonde teammate, and Kakashi contemplating how to force the blonde to train the Uchiha. The man's house was actually a renovated inn, so they were able to each get a room to themselves. Dinner was a quiet affair, though it was quite delicious, as Tazuna's daughter, Tsunami, was quite the cook. Her son, Inari, however, spoiled the meal with an outburst of, "You're all going to die." Nobody can stand up to Gato, before the child stormed up to his room. Naruto looked up to the plush toy on his head, and had to hold in a snort of laughter as a thought presented itself to him. That boy could teach Sasuke how to truly angst. His little black cloud of gloom was twice the size of the Uchihas. Truly, that one must be some form of prodigy in the arts of brooding. After bidding the family good night, Naruto headed up to his room. He placed a magical ward or two against intruders around the room, before slipping into bed, holding the fox doll to his chest. The next morning, as they all headed down to breakfast, with Sakura's angst intensified when she realized that her blonde teammate's hair was just as perfect as ever, Kakashi decided to greet them in his own unique way. Zabuza is still alive. This caused Naruto to snicker a bit, causing Sasuke and Sakura to break out of gloom and doom mode to glare at him. Kakashi also joined in on the glare, not liking to be made fun of. Something you find funny, Naruto? The blonde in question pulled an innocent face, though his purple eyes seemed to sparkle in impish delight as he replied. Well, I'm just surprised it took you this long to realize the hunter Nin was a fake. I was just toying with the man, though, if I really wanted to kill him I would have used lightning techniques instead of fighting water with water. You didn't really think he'd die from a water technique, did you? The hunter Nin placed him in a near-death state with the needles hitting a vital pressure point in his neck. From taking a nearly direct hit from the water, as well as the stress placed on the body from the near-death state, he'll be out of it for a week or two. Kakashi's glare intensified as he sent Sasuke and Sakura down to breakfast without them, saying he needed to speak with Naruto about something. As soon as he was sure they were out of earshot, he rounded on the genin, his one eye nearly blazing in fury. If you knew he wasn't dead, then why didn't you kill him? The boy met his glare, lips twisting in a slight sneer. Because the man actually has honor, unlike you, thief. I know you were trying to copy my abilities while I was fighting. Don't you have any grace at all, or do you always copy from your own comrades? The copy Nin sputtered a little in indignation at the accusation, while the blonde walked down to breakfast, pulling his doll off his head and placing it securely in his left arm. Outside, 3 hours later, Kakashi had told them that he was going to train them, finally, so as to be able to correctly fight Zabuza and his accomplice. Naruto could barely hold in his laughter at the exercise they were going to do. Tree walking? That's the basis of control of all energies, and the man was only now teaching it to them? Sensing that one of his students wasn't awed at the feat of walking against the flow of gravity directly upward, he glared at the offender, finding it to be the one he hated most. Deciding he would wipe the non-existent smirk off the teen's face, he called down to him from upside down on the tree branch. Naruto, since you don't seem to be surprised at all by this, how about you go first? The blonde simply let out a derisive laugh, with a mocking reply. Sure thing, Hitaki-san. He walked slowly towards the tree, not stopping at all to gather his energy as he walked directly up the trunk, his pace not wavering in the least as he went all the way to the top before back-flipping off the top, landing barefooted on the ground without even a thud. Kakashi's glare intensified as he decided to put his plan into action. Naruto, can I speak with you for a minute? The teen simply shrugged his shoulders, still holding onto that accursed doll in one arm as he followed his teacher out into the woods. Once they were out of sight or earshot of his two teammates, the teacher rounded on him, and he could feel the arrogance and smugness emanating off the man. I order you, as your sensei, to teach Sasuke your techniques. You have far too much power to be a genin, and Sasuke needs that power to get his revenge on his brother. Naruto's left eyebrow twitched once, twice, 3 times, before finally answering the man, a disbelieving look on his face. Do you really think that, if the council failed to order me to do so, that you would succeed? I will give you this one last warning, Hitaki. Do not fuck with me, as I am not to be trifled with. To further prove his declaration, his leg shot out in a snap kick, which landed solidly on the Junin's chest. The blow caused all air to rush out of his lungs, leaving him winded and gasping for breath, doubled over with his hands on his knees. The blonde disappeared off into the forest to do his own training, not to be seen for the rest of the week, much to Sasuke's and Kakashi's irritation. 6 days later, twilight in the forest. Naruto was currently sitting against a tree, eyes closed as he worked on trying to blend 2 elements together. He was almost succeeding, but something was missing. He was broken out of his meditation as he felt another person enter the clearing with the stealth of a shinobi. One purple eye opened slightly, so as to continue the illusion of being asleep. The intruder upon the clearing was a little shorter than him, and looked quite feminine. They were wearing a pink kimono, and held a basket on their left arm with a few herbs inside it. The figure had long, brown hair, and was currently approaching with their arm outstretched to gently shake him awake. His eyes snapped open completely before the person could touch him, causing them to back away in slight shock and fright. Sensing no inherent malice coming from the other person, he relaxed a little and tried to find out why the person seemed so familiar. "Sorry about scaring you, but I don't like being touched." The woman nodded a little, her brown eyes sparkling in a bit of sadness and understanding. Naruto was confused at that part, and blinked a little in shock as she seemed to recollect some memory of a distant past, if her misty gaze into the air were any indication. Her soft voice carried a hint of sadness before she snapped out of her daze. "I understand. Sorry about waking you." Naruto shook his head slightly, before standing up with a stretch, his doll situated atop his head. "Don't worry about it. I was awake by the time you entered the clearing. Why are you out here, anyway?" The girl seemed to be slightly shocked that he was feigning sleep the entire time she saw him, before answering, one hand gesturing to the basket on her arm. "I'm gathering medicinal herbs to help someone close to me. Would you like to help?" The teen decided he might as well, as helping her might help him remember how he knew her. As he helped her gather different herbs to staunch bleeding, promote faster healing, and ease pain, he realized who she was. "So, Hunter Nin-san, how's Zabuza-san doing?" The girl stiffened, and backed away. She hadn't brought any weapons with her when she had gone to collect herbs, and this boy was certainly terrifying in the power he wielded. She decided that, if he hadn't attacked her yet, she might have a chance. "He's doing all right, though I'm curious to know how you knew I was the Hunter Nin." The blonde gave a soft chuckle, pulling the doll off his head and setting it on the ground. "The herbs you are collecting are the same ones I had to use back when I was training with my water manipulation. The bludgeoning force of water causes pain, as well as internal bleeding, and the needle trick you pulled would have put some heavy stress on the body. Would you mind if I accompanied you back to Zabuza-san? I wanted to thank him for providing a challenge for me, as I haven't had one in well over half a year." The woman nodded slightly, for fear that, should she refuse, the boy would attack her. She was considerably surprised when the doll lifted the basket's handle using its tails, and walked beside them as they headed towards their base. At her shocked and slightly curious stare, the teen decided he should give her a half-truth. "Part of my bloodline allows me to animate inanimate objects. When I use stronger techniques, I use my doll to help me in my manipulation. Surely when you were watching the fight, you noticed how it moved." The woman nodded a bit, still curious about the plush toy. She gave him a slight smile, and decided that, since he told her about his bloodline, she might as well reciprocate. "I see. My bloodline allows me to use Hyatin, ice element, techniques. I've never heard of your kind of bloodline before, though. Is it rare?" The blonde nodded slightly, before his lips twitched upward in a slight smile. "I'm the last of my line, I believe. I've been trying to recreate fusion elements through my manipulation, like ice and wood, but something is missing about it. Perhaps, should we both live through this mission, you could give me a hint?" The woman was a little shocked at that, as she didn't think anyone would be able to recreate her bloodline's ability. However, this boy seemed to be like her, almost. Before she could answer, she had to ask him another question, as they were within sight of the base by now. "I'll think about it, but tell me, why do you fight?" The boy's lips curled into a sad smile, startling both her and the doll, as the boy nearly never showed his real emotions. His voice had a haunted, faraway aspect to it. "I fight for a promise I made to one who became my family. I promised her that I would take care of myself." The woman gave a sad nod, before replying, "I fight for those that are precious to me. To protect my precious people, I will encase my heart in ice and become a true shinobi, should it be required. My name is Haku, by the way." The blonde gave her a slight smile, and nodded politely. "Precious people, My name is Naruto." Haku opened the door to Zabuza's room, to find Gato berating the man for not killing the bridge builder. The blonde skillfully hid himself in the room, using a complex weave of mana to seem to sink into the wall. In reality, he had simply disguised himself as the wall, letting light pass through him. After Gato tried to strike at Zabuza's supine form with his cane, which caused Haku to blur into action, catching his wrist and snapping it like a twig, he left, calling out that they would pay for their insolence. Naruto had to stifle a snort at that, as the man's bodyguards were simply pseudo-samurai with no real abilities besides knowing how to use crude batujutsu, drawing techniques. Zabuza finally took notice of the fox plush carrying the basket of herbs and spun his head around, looking for the blonde who owned said doll. The boy appeared from the wall, startling the recovering man, though he couldn't sense any ill intent from the boy. The blonde held out his hand in a peaceful gesture before speaking. "I simply wanted to thank you for actually posing a challenge to me. It's been well over half a year since I had to go that far. Plus, I thought you had honor when you agreed to a water fight, instead of using your specialty of silent killing to try to blind me and assassinate me with your sword." The man grinned from the bed, showing off pointy teeth as the mask of bandages was absent, before replying. "Sure thing, brat. Only Haku can usually keep up with me when I start to use water jutsus, though yours are considerably more destructive." The blonde gave a slight smirk at the description, before picking up his doll and handing the basket to Haku. He sat on the edge of the bed and scratched behind the fox's ears. I'm a destruction specialist, as I use wide-scale elemental techniques of all elements to overwhelm and destroy. Haku has real talent, though, but not on the battlefield. She seems a little too gentle for that. However, when I was training with my mentor a while back, she told me something that holds true to Haku. Anyone can destroy, but only truly skilled people can heal. At the time, I thought she was talking about the control required for the healing techniques, but I think now I realize what she meant. It's considerably easier to kill someone and not think twice about it, than to heal the wounded. Haku smiled a little at this, and Zabuza seemed to think it over before nodding. The fox doll gave a toothy grin, before speaking, which surprised both Zabuza and Haku. "Took you long enough to figure that out, brat. The crazy bitch always was telling you stories about her friends, and it took you this long to realize what she was talking about." The blonde glared at the doll, before retaliating. "No more ear scratches until we're back in Konoha, for that. Plus, you're not supposed to talk around other people." The fox doll looked absolutely stricken at the news, his normally menacing red eyes tearing up and widening into a kicked puppy look. His ears laid back against his head, and his tail seemed to droop. Haku almost squealed a kawaii at the scene, and Zabuza was intrigued. "I noticed your doll could move, but I didn't know it could talk." Naruto scratched the side of his cheek sheepishly, while the doll was brokenly sobbing in Haku's arms. "My doll has a soul, but since it's a Kyuubi doll, I normally won't let him talk as most of Konoha already wants to tear him limb from limb for just resembling the fox. If you were to speak, well, you know." The Kiri nin snickered at that, as they both watched Haku squeeze the life out of the doll in a hug. "Anyway, I came to tell you also that Hitaki is trying to train my two teammates to get ready for a second battle, should you attack again. Though if he orders me to teach Uchiha-sama again, I swear I'll turn him into a statue. The man has absolutely no honor, as he tried to steal my techniques with his implanted eye while we were fighting. Thankfully, he was too busy staring at me to steal your jutsus." Zabuza was considerably shocked at this. What kind of teacher tries to go behind their back to steal their own students' techniques? He cracked a slight grin at the lack of respect for the Junin, his own respect for the famed copy Nen taking a hit from the news. After bidding a fond farewell to Haku and Zabuza, read. Haku tried to find out if dolls could suffocate in hugs, while Zabuza and Naruto snickered at the poor fox's predicament. Naruto headed back to Tazuna's house. Unfortunately, the two nins were still going to attack the bridge builder, as it was their job. However, that didn't mean that, should they attack, that Naruto had to let them die. He cradled the traumatized fox doll in his arms, who was muttering about crazy ice bitches and killer hugs of doom, lightly scratching behind the doll's ears as he headed through the forest back to Tazuna's house. He entered without a sound, before going back to his still-warded room and slipping in quietly. The next day, 8 a.m., Naruto awoke to a woman screaming, who sounded oddly like Tsunami. He hopped out of bed, slipping on an identical outfit almost absent-mindedly as he picked up the fox plush. He cradled it in one arm as he sprinted down the stairs and out the back door to see an odd sight. Inari, tears streaming down his face, was charging the two hired pseudo-samurai with nothing but a butcher knife as his protection. Tsunami was currently bound and gagged in between the two men as they leered predatorily at the approaching boy, hands on the sheaths of their swords. Naruto blinked a little at the suicidal boy, wondering if his mother meant so much to him that he'd lay down his life in a futile effort to free her. He gave a slight shrug, before casting a spell that seemed fitting to the situation. Break. The single word caused all people to look towards him, his fox doll in hand as his arm was outstretched towards the two samurai. They were about to jeer at him about how his technique didn't work, before they noticed their arms and legs were stiffening. They looked at the boy in pure horror as they felt their entire bodies become stone, the sensation incredibly foreign and terrifying to the mercenaries. Inari and Tsunami just looked on in awe as the two men were petrified, before Tsunami shrieked in fear as Naruto gave both statues a swift kick, turning them to dust. He undid her bindings and gave her a slight smile, before disappearing in a swirl of water. Do not feel bad for them, as they deserved every moment of it. Be glad that they only suffered a small amount, for their crimes against the country were grave. Take care of Inari, Tsunami-san. At the bridge, Haku currently had Sasuke trapped within one of her personally created techniques, the Makio Hyusho, demonic ice mirrors. She was currently reflecting from mirror to mirror, throwing volleys of needles at the boy, trying to avoid killing if she had to. Sakura was protecting Tazuna, and Zabuza was hidden in the mist, fighting Zanbato against Kunai against Kakashi. Naruto arrived just as Haku had finally lost her temper at the Uchiha's arrogance, believing that he had won as soon as he had unlocked his dojutsu. To prove him wrong, she threw needles into his neck, sending him into a near-death state. She wasn't quite ready to make her first kill, and she let her technique drop, watching Zabuza's fight with Kakashi. The blonde appeared next to her, looked at the body of Sasuke riddled with needles and snickered. He bowed to Haku, stating in a mock-respective tone, "Haku dono, I bow to your greatness at shutting up Uchiha-sama." The girl gave a soft laugh, before taking off her mask to continue watching Zabuza's fight. The nuke nin was currently winning, though he had a few wounds of his own. Kakashi had a spark of genius, and unrolled a summoning scroll, calling out his technique as he did hand seals and wiped his blood across the kanji. Kachiyose. Doden. Suiga no Jutsu. Summoning. Earth Element. Tracking Fang Technique. Multiple summoned nin dogs disappeared into the ground, before resurfacing underneath Zabuza's feet. They all piled onto him, biting deep into his arms and legs to immobilize him. Haku gave a slight start, as she realized her mentor was in trouble, but Naruto held onto her shoulder firmly, his serious gaze looking slightly less grim due to the fact that he had a fox plush on the top of his head. Haku-san, please allow me the honors of screwing up this attempt on your mentor's life. If my senses are correct, Gato is actually heading this way with a large force of mercenaries, and I don't think they're for us. You need to be in top condition, just in case. With that said, the fox doll hopped down to the ground at the blonde's feet. He concentrated intensely, as Kakashi bragged about his original technique, the air starting to swirl around the blonde as a violet aura erupted to life. He whispered a soft, "Blizzaga," before his eyes snapped open, the glittering purple orbs focusing intently on a spot just in front of Zabuza. The air chilled dangerously in that area, before ice crystals started to form at a rapid pace. Zabuza only had an instant to wonder if it was Haku protecting him before the crystals slammed into each other and exploded in growth, creating a 4-foot-thick block of blue ice, blocking Kakashi's piercing jab of the Chidori, 1,000 birds. The lightning faded from the copy nin's hand, as he searched for the source of the ice barrier. Before he could find the source, a sound of mocking clapping resounded through the mist, before Zabuza lifted it to see their audience. Gato, with about 300 mercenaries, stood at the end of the bridge and was sneering in his direction. The summoned nin dogs disappeared in a poof of gray smoke as a single senbon needle hit the summoning scroll, destroying the technique and releasing Haku's mentor. Zabuza stood and glared at the wealthy man, asking what he thought he was doing with a force like that. The arrogant little man replied that, since he and Haku weren't doing their jobs correctly, he was just going to kill them with the Konoha nins, using the mercenary force. Haku bristled at that, before teleporting to her mentor's side with an ice mirror, and running a quick healing technique to start to patch up his wounds. Zabuza looked to Kakashi, who was glaring at the ice wall, and simply stated that his mission was over and that they didn't need to fight any longer. The man reluctantly nodded, more because he was tired and probably couldn't kill the nuke nin due to putting so much of his chakra into his attack. Naruto grinned and walked over beside them, the ice shattering and melting back into water before evaporating into the air. The Kyuubi doll was in his arms again as he spoke, shocking the three nins. "I will take care of them. Kakashi, you go tend to Sasuke, as he's in a near-death state due to Senbon needles, and Sakura is currently bawling her eyes out over his corpse. I also think she's going to try to embalm his body and keep it as some sort of souvenir or something, so you might want to hurry." The Junin looked up in shock and fear, before sprinting over to his student's side. Zabuza and Haku were snickering at the thought, and Naruto shocked both them and the doll in his arms. He gave them a true, warm smile, and extended a hand in a peaceful gesture towards them both. "Allow me to do this, for while I'm not sure I quite get the concept, I do believe I want to protect you both. I suppose you could say you both have earned my respect, and have been added to my short list of precious people." Before waiting for a reply, he strode gracefully to the center of the bridge, about 30 feet away from the bloodthirsty mob of mercenaries. He set the toy down at his feet, and a dark purple aura flared to life around him. His hair started to rise from the energy gathered, billowing out behind him as the wind picked up. The mob of villagers who had come to the bridge, as well as Sakura, Kakashi, Zabuza, Haku, and the newly revived Sasuke looked on in awe at the sight, as the aura darkened more and started to glow brighter. The teen spoke, his voice a chilling monotone as he gazed in clear disdain at the mercenaries, before he raised his arms above his head. "Your arrogance and greed sicken me. Prepare yourselves, for I will show no mercy." The greedy little midget laughed at this, asking what a girly boy would be able to do to him and his well-paid mercenaries. The doll came to life, its tails flicking to and fro in a hypnotic manner, though hidden to those behind the blonde due to the position of his feet. Most of the mercenaries stepped back in fear at the sight, however, but were unable to escape as a single word was murmured loud enough for all to hear, before both the blonde's arms descended. Ultima. The scenery descended into darkness for all, not just those caught by the spell. Odd flickers of light flashed brightly, before they condensed around the mob of mercenaries led by Gato. They formed a sphere, before condensing and brightening. Finally, an explosion of power erupted from the center, blinding everyone with a bright white light as shockwaves of energy ripped every last one of them apart before disintegrating the remains, and then the darkness receded. The bridge was, astonishingly enough, unharmed, though it was marred by the blood of hundreds having been spilled by the spell. All the onlookers had their jaws touching the floor from the raw destructive power of that one attack, before the boy scooped up the plush doll and turned to face them. He gave a slight shrug, and said, "They deserved it," before walking off. The next day, they were just about ready to leave, when Haku approached Naruto with a slight smile on her face, and whispered in his ear. The blonde visibly brightened, and actually gave the woman a hug, nearly scaring the poor doll on his head out of his wits. The ice user then teleported away through an ice mirror, and left with Zabuza to continue wandering. When questioned later, the blonde would say, "She gave me a hint on something." On the way back to Konoha, however, they ran into a bit of trouble. As they stepped out into the same clearing that Naruto and Zabuza ravaged in their water fight, two presences made themselves known by stepping out of the tree line. One was a rather tall, bulky shark-like man, with blue-tinged skin, dark blue hair, gill markings on his face, and a bandaged object on his back. He also had a slashed mist. Hide the second, however, was quite recognizable. He was shorter than his companion by about a head, yet carried himself with grace and an air of indifference. His hair was long and black, tied back in a ponytail falling in between his shoulder blades. He had two markings on either sides of his nose, like diagonal slashes. They looked, oddly enough, like bags under his eyes. What really sparked the familiarity were two red eyes, each with three tomos spinning around them in a hypnotic manner. The slashed Konoha Hite was what sealed the deal. This man was Uchiha Itachi. The two both had bamboo hats with strips of cloth dangling from them in their hands, bells tied to the ends of the cloth jingling a little with each movement. Naruto, seeing a chance to forever piss off his teammate, and possibly find out what 2's class nuke Nen wanted at the same time, decided to do something he would never have even dreamed of in a normal situation. He looked at Itachi, who stared emotionlessly back, before looking at Sasuke. He then struck a thinking pose, with the doll situated on his head. Quickly drumming up his courage, he did the unthinkable. He squealed in a perfect imitation of a fangirl, causing everyone to look at him like he lost his mind. He quickly schooled his face into that of a love-struck fangirl, and turned to Sasuke, stars in his eyes. "You never told me you had an evil older brother." This, of course, caused Sasuke to break out of his shock and yell, "Itachi!" before charging his elder brother, who simply backhanded him across the face without even looking, knocking him out and slamming him into a tree. Kakashi, worried about the Uchiha heir's health, rushed to his side, along with Sakura. Naruto regained his composure, though the doll on his head had to be moved to his arms to stifle the hilarious laughter emanating from it. Naruto walked forward slowly and nodded politely to them both. "So, I'm guessing you two needed something with me? By the cloaks with the pretty red clouds, I suppose you're Akatsuki?" They both nodded, a little shocked and afraid of his rapid mood swing, and Itachi was having issues repressing his fangirl sense, as the blonde had dredged up bad memories. As his team was currently indisposed with caring for a knocked-out Sasuke, he shrugged and asked the obvious question. "What do you need?" Itachi was the one who spoke, stepping forward a little and settling his unnerving gaze on Naruto's purple eyes. His voice was soft, but carried a tone of authority to it. "We need you to come with us, Naruto-kun, as we are interested in your Biju." The blonde lifted one eyebrow, before holding the plush toy out in his hands. Itachi looked at it for a second, before lifting his own eyebrow in silent question. Naruto decided to elaborate for the slightly confused elder Uchiha. "I had him sealed into this doll when I was 3. If you're going to take him somewhere, I'm coming with you. He gets pissed when I'm not there, as I control his Yuki usage." Kisame started to snicker at this, and Itachi's lips started to twitch as if he wanted to laugh. The plush doll, however, didn't find this funny at all, and flicked his fluffy tails in agitation. "There's no way I'm going anywhere without the brat. I'm having too much fun being his weapon of mass destruction, damn it." Kisame looked over at Itachi, barely muffling his laughter at the great Kyuubi no Kitsune, sealed into a squishy plush toy. Itachi looked back at him, and nodded, before turning back to Naruto. "We may have to come back after speaking to our leader about this. He may want you to join Akatsuki. We only wanted the power of the Bijus by extracting them from the Jinchuriki, but since yours is sealed in this doll, I suppose we could maybe use you as a member, provided you wish to join." The blonde cradled the doll in his arm for a moment, before placing it back on his head and tapping his chin. His answer, however, caused Kisame to fall flat on his face. "Will I get to wear an awesome hat like yours? And maybe get a smaller one made for Kyuubi?" Itachi actually seemed to smirk at this, before nodding. He then said, "Come, Kisame," before they both disappeared in a puff of black smoke. By now, Kakashi and Sakura had ascertained that Sasuke was going to be alright, and came back into the clearing, unconscious boy cradled in Kakashi's arms. At Kakashi's question of, "Where did they go?" Naruto just shrugged and said, "Dunno." The gray-haired man didn't think to question the blonde further, and started off at a faster pace to Konoha to get Uchiha-sama to a hospital. Naruto jumped to the trees, taking the faster route to Konoha, as he held an in-depth discussion with his doll. They both reached a decision, just as they came through Konoha's gates. He disappeared in a swirl of lightning, shocking all the villagers nearby who never saw a shunshin like that, and further scaring them when it echoed in a resounding boom of thunder. In the Hokage's office, Naruto had appeared while the Hokage was just about to take a paper off the top of the stack of his paperwork, and the lightning elemental Shunshin's thunder caused him to stumble, knocking the stack over onto the floor. The aged man glared heavily at the evil paper, before addressing the boy in his office. "Naruto-kun, you're back early. Was there something wrong with the mission?" The blonde shook his head, and told the Sandame all about the mission, including that they encountered 2 Akatsuki members who wanted to take him away, before making up some story that he had distracted them. It was a half-truth, damn it. The aged man bought it, however, and adopted a grim look on his face. "This is grave news indeed." Naruto adopted an exaggerated thinking pose, before seeming to wonder aloud. I dunno, I may have to ask about joining them. They have these awesome hats. The Hokage, nicknamed God of Shinobi, and the Professor, fainted. Meeting Guy and Kakashi's mask. Naruto had decided that enough was enough. He was going to take something so dangerous, so incredibly risky, that not even the Hokage could classify it as a mission. Many shinobi have asked for it as a mission when they were feeling suicidal, and not even the Hokage would force them to suffer the fate of those who failed. He sent them on standard high-profile assassination missions instead, as then their deaths would make the target more arrogant about their bodyguard system, making them more susceptible to real assassinations. The mission Naruto had in mind would shake Orochimaru to the core at how impossible and daunting the task seemed. The man created a probable way of immortality, but this was too much for even him. He was going to find out what the fuck Kakashi's face looked like. If Naruto's theory was correct, this would be the ultimate in blackmail material. He had hypothesized that either his Hitaki's face looked absolutely marvelous, and he could threaten to spread the photos around, or the man looked hideous behind that blue face mask, and didn't want to feel ashamed of his looks. His final theory, though plausible, was highly unlikely. Perhaps the man had an incredibly unmanly tattoo on his face? Either way, that goddamn mask was going to go. After relaying his mission to his doll, the plush's eyes had widened and mumbled a, "You're too young to die," before yelling at him in the privacy of his own home. "I'm the fucking Kyuubi no Kitsune, and even I'm afraid of the consequences of failing that mission." The black mage gave a grave nod, before making one of the most potentially suicidal decisions of his life, with an even higher fatality risk than disguising yourself as Uchiha Itachi at the annual Fan People convention, based in Wave Country. Those fiends would rip you apart, just wanting to have a piece of Itachi. He had heard that someone made a fortune by somehow managing to gain a hair from his eyebrow before, and he shuddered to think of what vital organs would sell for. "I don't care. I will finish this mission, and I will be alive at the end of it. That man's face shall be shown." And so started what would later be renowned throughout the elemental countries as the time when a 15-year-old genin defied fate itself and attempted the SSS-class mission of unmasking Hitaki Kakashi. He quickly packed a bag with things needed for this mission: clothing, a high-definition camera, and his plush toy, which was safely situated on his head. He tied back his bright blonde hair, and used raw mana manipulation to alter the appearance of it, giving it a dull black color that seemed to absorb all light. He was absolutely ready. However, Kyuubi was gnawing on his stuffed fingernails in fear of what would happen should they fail. He wanted to get one thing off his chest before they set out. "If anything happens to you, I wanted to tell you that you're like the son, apprentice, sibling I never had, and I'm proud that you inherited my sadism and fighting spirit. I also wanted to let you know that, when you see Lulu on the other side, to tell her I hate her for calling me fluffy, but I love her for giving you weapons of mass destruction, me included, at your fingertips." The black mage was quite surprised at the fear his doll was showing, and gave the fox a few belly scratches. He contemplated what he was going to say before shrugging, deciding that if he was captured or failed this mission, he was probably going to die anyway, and might as well say it. He gave the doll a warm smile, and answered, "Kyuubi-kun, I wanted to tell you that I'm thankful that I had a companion like you throughout most of my life. You're the greatest doll I could have wished for, and I'm actually quite glad you were sealed inside me. If not, I may have fallen to the lies and deceit of this village, and become yet another mindless drone willing to throw their lives away for the decrepit council." With that said, he gave the fox doll a reassuring hug, before setting out. He swore he would complete this mission and come out alive. Konoha streets. Nobody really noticed a flicker of black as it weaved its way through the crowd, hopping from shadow to shadow so as to not arouse suspicion. Every now and then a speck of red or purple would appear along with the black, but it would be gone so quickly it was as if it never existed. The figure was searching all over for the elusive Junin, who he was sure had the day off for the day, and he was determined to find him. He checked high and low, near and far, and even checked the Hokage tower, and asked the aged man where he could find Hitaki. The Hokage had given him a quizzical look, before he elaborated. "I'm determined to see underneath that mask. Rumor states that not even Hyugas can look under it." Sarutobi's eyes widened in shock, before his voice broke the silence. "Are you mad? Nobody ever came back alive and unharmed after those missions. They all failed horribly." The black mage nodded, pure determination sparkling through his odd eyes. I know and I'm well aware, but I'm positive that I will be the one to find out what's underneath that mask. If only to get some blackmail on the Junin. Sarutobi sighed wearily, knowing he would be unable to dissuade the blonde, temporarily raven-haired, teen. His thoughts ran rampant on the subject as he seemed to age decades as he contemplated what to do, before he nodded, mostly to himself. You can find him at the memorial stone. He's usually there. Naruto gave the man a slight salute, before disappearing in a black void, leaving no trace behind. The Sandaime leaned back in his chair, sending his prayers with the young man who seemed to be doomed. A thought broke through his reverent silence, startling him. What the hell am I going to tell Jiraiya when he asks where Naruto is so that he can train him? My student can't train someone who's dead. Damn it, this means more paperwork. At the memorial stone, the black mage landed soundlessly on a tree branch, studying his gray-haired sensei with a wary eye. The man wouldn't be that bad, if he didn't have that retarded grudge against him. Well, that's not entirely true, as he was still a hypocrite who didn't follow his own saying of, those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their teammates are worse than trash, and he was a dishonorable thief. Come to think of it, wasn't he rivals with Maeda Guy, the taijutsu specialist? He almost shuddered to think of how many taijutsu styles he learned inexplicably quickly throughout his career from sparring matches with the eccentric spandex-loving Junin. Poor man, not even his extreme amounts of youthfulness can save him from the Sharingan. Did I just refer to that as youthfulness? Fuck, I need to quit spending time around Konoha, that spandex virus is starting to infect me. He gave a violent shudder when he thought of what he would look like in green spandex, before a devilish glint lit up his eyes. He kept his voice as a soft murmur as he whispered conspiratorially with his plush toy, whose eyes widened in the pure deviance of what the teen was saying. The fox broke out into a maniacal grin, his tails twitching in anticipation as they refined their mission objectives a little, and disappeared to make accommodations. Guy's living quarters. Naruto found it actually quite easy to disable the traps and alarm systems on Guy's apartment, guessing that the man really didn't have that many enemies wanting to kill him. Or, more likely, they were too afraid of what his living quarters would be, should his eccentric ways be any indicator of how his entire life would be. The taijutsu master really did have a rather odd internal designer. More likely, the man declared having an internal designer, as well as fashion sense, as unyouthful, and did it all himself. The walls of his apartment were painted in the exact shade of green as his spandex suit, and had hundreds of weights stacked all around the walls in varying densities, anything from a tiny weight that weighed 40 pounds, obviously to slip into a weight belt, to weights designed for lifting, a bit less dense than the tinier ones. There were a few books in a bookshelf, mainly on muscle training theory or taijutsu exercises. There was a sheaf of papers on top of a desk along with a reading light. He walked over on silent footsteps as he read over the title, and realized that Guy was actually writing a book. A training manual, to be exact, on the uses of the celestial gates, as well as their pros and cons. However, it suggested to constantly wear a green spandex bodysuit as one of the precursors to the training regime, and the title was a bit off. You and Your Youthfulness, A Guide to the Springtime of Youth, using the Celestial Body Gates by Maeda Guy. The doll on his head shuddered heavily as he thought of all the impressionable children that could be corrupted by this book in progress. Naruto, however, thought it was a rather nice gesture of the man, although done a bit oddly. He obviously had quite a bit of knowledge on what he was doing, if all these detailed notes on the how each and every gate affects someone meant something. He supposed the shiny bowl-cut, green spandex suit, and incredibly sparkly teeth were just a quirk of the taijutsu master, and shrugged it off. Most Junins had something to deal with the stress of killing people for money, and he couldn't fault them for the different ways that they chose to express it. He continued on his search, finally finding the man's closet. He opened the door with a feeling of intense dread, almost horrified of what might be hidden within. After he fully opened the door, he almost fell to the floor in shock of what he was seeing. Guy had normal clothing, not just any normal clothing, but actual stylish normal clothing. Sure, there were around 4 spandex bodysuits, as the man obviously had great hygiene, if the absolutely luminous teeth were anything to go by, but the rest of the closet was full of great clothing. The doll actually fell off his head in pure awe at the spectacle, but he was able to catch the plush toy before he impacted with the floor. Quickly deciding that his respect at the spandex-clad Junin raised several notches, he crossed off one of the routes to go about his new plan with Hitaki. He refused to steal from this man, as he obviously A. had some sort of dignity, as he had normal clothing, B. had great pride in his work, and wanted to pass it on to others who he couldn't manually teach, and C. damn, he wanted to learn how to make his teeth that shiny. He set off towards Training Ground 27, where he knew Team 9 was training, intent on asking the Junin a question or two. Training Ground 27, about 11 a.m. Naruto appeared within a swirl of snow, shocking the ninja team there. He had been working on his ice manipulation, after being given the hint by Haku, and was able to make a shunshin out of it, much to his delight. A little-known fact about Naruto is that he really loves his different teleportation techniques, and strives to come up with new ones to offset the standard smoke, or swirl of leaves that everyone else in Konoha does. Guy regarded the newcomer warily, as Naruto had dropped the weave of mana over his hair once he changed his mind about stealing from the spandex Junin. The taijutsu master had heard about his eternal rival, Kakashi's eccentric student, but hearing and seeing are two different things. Firstly, the boy obviously was quite advanced, as he had not only had a flawless shunshin, but he was able to interchange elemental effects with it. The boy also displayed exemplary control, as well as multiple elemental affinities, and showed that he was completely unbiased, and reactionary in any of the situations he was placed in. He decided to give the team the benefit of the doubt, and disregarded the fox plush doll on his head, having seen odder things in his time of being a ninja. Tenten, the weapons mistress, was quite intrigued with the newcomer. She had heard from several loose-tongued ninja around the village that there was a blonde-haired demon walking around, but she couldn't see anything wrong with Yamanaka Ino, aside from the banshee squealing and fangirl-ism, so this was the only other person with blonde hair, sans the Yamanaka clan, in the village. She inspected him, her incredible eyesight, gained from years of throwing different weapons for perfect accuracy with any given weapon, whether it was meant to be a projectile or no, taking in almost unnoticeable details. The teen was obviously fit, if the toned stomach meant anything, though he didn't have the bulk, as she called it, of her teammate Lee or her sensei, Guy. His muscles were lean and wiry, lending him to flexibility and evasion, as well as precision-based combat instead of heavy hand-to-hand combat. His long, golden blonde hair looked to be not uncared for, but definitely not high on his priority list. She oddly wondered that, if he had long hair but didn't worship it like others do, why he kept it at that length. She pushed that thought to the side, as she continued her observation. The blonde's rather odd eyes had the weirdest shade of purple, and she had seen weird shades of purple before. Her teammate, Hyuga Neji, had nearly white-purple eyes, and the entirety of the Hyuga clan had some shade of lavender for eyes. This teen's eyes were an almost jewel-like shade of amethyst, and looked quite shielded from the outside world. He showed no emotion on his noble-looking face, but didn't give off an air of superiority like the Uchiha or Hyuga. He simply seemed neutral. His clothing seemed a little odd, with wide, flowing sleeves, as well as revealing his stomach, and the way his shinobi pants rode low on his hips, but she was used to odd clothing. Her eyes also rested on the Kyuubi doll on his head, which she could have sworn gave her a smile when she finished her inspection, but she convinced herself it was just a doll. Lee was beaming a grin worthy of Guy himself, wondering how this newcomer could appear without so much as a hint of his approach, something that should have made him quite wary. However, he simply saw it as a possible partner for sparring. Neji gave the teen a glare, his inner Neji screaming inside his head about how he spent so much time making his dark brown hair as silky and shiny as it is, but this newcomer had even better hair than he. He was about to go into his brooding mode, with angst levels clearly surpassing that of the last Uchiha, when he realized that the boy didn't even seem to care about his own appearance, as if his hair was just naturally perfect. This, of course, pushed his angst levels to much higher than normal, causing the grass around him to wilt and decay. Breaking the awkward silence, Naruto decided that he would be polite and not blunt for once, as he was still trying to ascertain if his respect for the green-clad Junin was placed well. "Hello, Guy-san. Please forgive me for my sudden intrusion, but I was wondering, since Hitaki-san seems to be busy either brooding over the memorial stone, or training the Uchiha when he thinks nobody is looking, if I might observe how a real team interacts. I arrived in Konoha on the day of the Genin exam, and, though I am a newcomer, I am quite sure my team is not exactly satisfactory in teamwork. Guy was notably surprised, as the stories he had heard from Kakashi always detailed the team to be a wolf in sheepskin, as it were. The gray-haired Junin was positive his student's animated doll was either the Kyuubi, or he himself was the Kyuubi. Speaking of the doll, it was noticeably inanimate at the moment, and he was curious as to how the blonde manipulated it, wondering if perhaps it was a form of the Kugutsu puppetry technique. Adopting a rare serious face, the Junin nodded a bit before responding. Sure thing, Naruto-san. May I ask a question first? The blonde gave the man a slight twitch of his lips, and only Guy and Tenten's eyes caught the movement on the normally immobile face. Using their experience with Neji, a stoic, yet arrogant, Hyuga, they realized the blonde was giving a slight impression of acceptance? Before they could ponder more, the enigmatic teen had answered. Of course, Guy-san. What would you like to know? The spandex-clad Junin tried to think of a way to phrase his question without it seeming too blunt or biased. He finally decided that he might as well just ask the question without flowery language, getting the impression that the teen's mind tended to rip apart what people say to find exactly what they're asking regardless. I have heard stories about how you fight. I was wondering how if it was true that you animate your doll, and if so, how you were able to do so. From what Kakashi said, it seemed as if there were no chakra strings to be a Kugutsu, making it quite an interesting ability. Tenten, Lee, and Neji were shocked at this, and the doll on the boy's head seemed to nod a praising ly at the Junin. The blonde struck a slight thinking pose, as if deciding whether to answer or not. Finally deciding that the green-clad man hadn't done anything to irritate him yet, he might as well give him the same answer he gave Haku. I have a rare bloodline that gives me extreme elemental control, as well as allowing me to animate inanimate objects. Fortunately for me, yet unfortunately for Hitaki-san, his Sharingan was unable to copy any of my abilities when he decided he would try to inspect them without my knowledge when I was engaged in a water battle with a nuke nin on our C-rank mission. Guy was immediately suspicious of this ability, as he wasn't just a taijutsu fanatic. He found many interesting things when he researched ancient taijutsu styles, and one of the things he had heard was the stories of a fabled set of warriors who used elemental techniques without hand seals, and tended to use something to help channel their energy. Most notably, they used staves, rods, or dolls. He was also shocked at the lack of honor his eternal rival had shown, attempting to steal techniques from one of his own students. While his 3 students seemed shocked at the bloodline the boy had, he decided to ask another question before basing his opinions. Naruto-san, would you agree to a spar with me so that I might see how this bloodline works in battle? I have to admit it perked my interests, and it would be helpful for my students to increase their youthfulness while watching such an interesting fighting style. The serious face of the spandex man seemed to slip a little at the last bit, causing Naruto's lips to twitch once again. The doll on his head seemed to be holding back a snicker, if Guy's eyes could read the movements correctly. The blonde tapped an index finger to his chin, before pulling the doll off his head and setting it on the ground, where it stood stock still. As you wish, Guy-san. Hand to hand, doll to hand, or full-out combat. The Junin, seeing a chance to see each aspect of the supposed bloodline, decided on a hidden option. How about hand-to-hand first, then doll-to-hand, then all-out combat? Most people with bloodlines will focus solely on the bloodline abilities, and neglect their other talents, and if your bloodline is how you say it is, I would expect you to be a bit shoddy with your taijutsu. Perhaps I could help you with it? Naruto gave a slight smirk as he realized what the Junin was playing at. The odd man seemed to actually have a hint of what he actually was, and he had to admit his respect grew from the observance. He wondered where he might have come across the information, but if he was correct, the man must try to revive ancient taijutsu styles, and may have come across black mages mentioned in history. He nodded his head politely and assumed a stance, which he could tell from the man's slight widening of his eyes that he recognized it. Guy indeed recognized it. It was a truly ancient hand-to-hand style, the name lost to the history books, and he had been studying it for the past few months as its potential was quite large. It encompassed flexibility, evasion, deflection, and precise strikes meant to cause intense pain to aggravate and cripple opponents. It required such immense training and flexibility that it was nearly impossible to copy it, however, and made it quite good against Sharingan users as they couldn't fight your style with the same style, unless they wanted to hurt themselves in the attempt. Guy shifted into his Goken, strong fist, stance, and his Genin team moved to the trees. The two stood there for what seemed like hours, before a single leaf fluttered from a tree, and they sprang into action. The doll, sensing it wasn't needed quite yet, hopped up into the trees with the Genin team, scaring them a bit. Though Neji wouldn't admit it, and hopped into Tenten's lap, watching the fight. Guy was quite surprised, as the boy seemed that he had trained in this style for over a decade, as he fluidly dodged, deflected, and blocked his powerful kicks and punches. The boy's pure flexibility surprised him, as it matched even with the body augmentations that Orochimaru used, though he was sure the boy had nothing of the sort done to him. He nearly marveled at the flexibility as the boy twisted his spine at an unhealthy angle, dodging a kick to his midsection, and delivering swift jabs to the insides of his thighs, as well as the sides of his knees, in turn. Guy wasn't a Junin for nothing, however, and he was able to swiftly slam the lancing pain that was trying to disorient him out of his mind, concentrating on getting a good spar out of this. The two continued their taijutsu spar for about 10 minutes, each giving as good as they got, though neither took it too far. It was merely a spar to compare styles, so Guy didn't remove his weights or open gates. If he had, he would have won purely by how much more experience he had in the realm of taijutsu. They both separated, breathing lightly. Guy had some swiftly purpling bruises from the accurate strikes of the black mage, while the blonde had a cracked rib or two, as well as quite a few bruises of his own, quite a bit bigger than Guy's. The doll hopped out of Tenten's lap, and jumped into Naruto's arms, who looked strangely satisfied at having a challenge to fight. Guy was the one who spoke first, his serious facade crumbling underneath the exuberance of finding someone who had successfully revived such an ancient style. Yosh, Naruto-kun, your youthfulness burns brightly. I have only heard legends of that style, and that it was incredibly dangerous to train in. How is it that you were able to use that style to its fullest? The blonde's stoic demeanor lifted a little, and a sad smile tugged at the edges of his lips, startling observant viewers. I was taught by my caretaker and mentor from when I was 3, to when I was 14. She had insisted that, since my bloodline is range-oriented, that I have a solid foundation in evading hand-to-hand combat, while making sure that I would be well defended should I be unable to escape close range. Guy nodded his head a little, his youthfulness slipping back into the next place, as he was getting quite excited at this fight. She must have been quite a youthful woman, Naruto-kun. Yosh, on to the next part. Doll-to-hand combat. Send it at me with as much as you have, Naruto-kun. The spandex-wearing Junin could have sworn he felt a malicious smirk coming from the doll, and the blonde nodded, his indifferent demeanor back into place. A pale violet aura flickered to life behind Naruto, as he backflipped away, dropping the doll in midair. The doll sprang to life, sprinting towards Guy at near Junin-level speeds and shocking the man slightly. He started to dodge as many of the attacks as he could, dishing a few kicks back when he could, though the 9 tails, as well as the sharp plush teeth, left very few gaps in the offense. Each of the tails caused crater-like dents in the ground, startling all but Naruto and the doll itself at the power packed within the doll, and causing the Junin to regard it with a bit of caution. Naruto, as Kyuubi was fully in control of his own movement for the fight, was wondering if he could give the Junin a better fight with the doll. It was quite small, too small to fight effectively, and obviously the man wanted to inspect how the doll could fight. He thought about it for a little, before he grinned as he remembered something he had heard from Lulu back when they were training. The only limits to black magic are your imagination. However, black magic can never delve into the realm of healing, as that is governed by white magic. No black magic spell has the possibility of healing, but aside from that, the possibilities are endless. When you want to create your own spells, you must think of what you want them to do, before opening your mind to the possibilities to meet those ends. Allow your instinct to guide you, but always make sure that you are able to guide your instinct, as well. He started to meditate for a moment, before the answer popped into his mind. The violet aura flared to life around him, darkening a little as he started to fabricate the spell. Guy noticed this, and wondered what the boy was doing, when the doll stopped in place as if frozen. Kyubi, feeling the spell starting to affect him, had stopped and wondered what the boy was up to now. As the ground sped further and further away from his muzzle, he realized the boy was making him grow, so as to give his opponent a better advantage. He could almost chuckle in delight at this, as he never really liked having an underhanded advantage, his attack on Konoha a notable exception. The doll was around 4 feet tall now, about 5 feet from nose to tail base, and each tail was about 6 feet long. The observing genins were quite shocked, as was Guy. Naruto could have cackled in glee at how his spell worked, before speaking loud enough for Team 9 to hear him. I felt that the doll's small stature was an unfair advantage for me, Guy-san, so I decided to try to increase its size. Now you can fight it effectively, however, it will be more powerful at the cost of the small target and nimble efficiency it had before. The Junin nodded, in slight awe of what the teen was able to do, before continuing the fight. The doll really was quite a bit stronger than before, the slight dents in the ground becoming full craters, and trees nearly splintered under the might of the tails whipping towards him. One of the notable disadvantages of fighting a doll, however, was the fact that it wasn't human. It didn't tire, it didn't feel pain, and most of all, it didn't have bones to break, which was one of the biggest advantages of Goken. Goken focuses on bludgeoning force, snapping bones beneath their strong strikes, and causing their opponent physical damage. Against a doll, it was quite useless. About 5 minutes later, a heavily breathing Guy called for a halt, and Naruto beckoned the doll to come towards him. The fox plush, while quite large, still had a soft spot for ear scratches it seems, as the fox's tail started to twitch side to side in happiness as Naruto busied himself with scratching, while Guy got his breath back to normal. It took about 10 minutes for the man to get his second wind, and the doll was safely back in Naruto's arms, back to its smaller state. The Junin was feeling quite exhilarated, though a bit scared, of what the boy would be like in all-out combat. The boy was clearly at least Junin in strength, though it seems Kakashi hadn't taught him at all, or even attempted to. He was quite disappointed by his rival at how he let such a prize student slip through his grasp. His genin were wide-eyed in shock and awe of the genin who had to be only a year younger than them. He showed that he was quite capable in taijutsu and his doll could easily fight on par with Guy when he still had his weights on. And that was only one facet of his bloodline. He had said that he had extreme manipulation over all the elements, and they were both a little afraid, and a little excited, to see what happened next. Naruto, deciding that the man really had earned his respect, politely spoke up in a softly amused tone. Guy-san, if we continue, I'm afraid that I won't be able to prevent this training area from being destroyed. Due to my elemental manipulation, I specialize in wide-scale demolition. If Hitaki-san told you anything about our encounters during the C-rank mission, surely he told you what happened when I was faced with opponents. The Junin blinked a little, before his eyes widened a bit in recollection. Kakashi had stated that his blonde student was a demon when it came to the battlefield, stating that the abilities he had were nothing short of cage-level destruction. He had said that the blonde had wiped out a full army of mercenaries, as well as their boss, with one technique. Deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, he wondered if he could perhaps compromise. You have a point, Naruto-san. Would it be possible for you to show some of your techniques, though? I haven't seen anyone able to accomplish much with pure elemental manipulation alone. The only Junin in Konoha that can do much at all with just the manipulation is Sarutobi Asuma, a trench knife specialist who uses his wind element to enhance the length and sharpness of his knives. The blonde thought about it for a moment, before nodding and responding with a question. Small explosions, bigger destruction, or wide-scale devastation? Guy thought about it for a moment, before nodding his head to himself. The best you have. To a point, of course, as I don't wish this training ground to be destroyed. The black mage's purple eyes seemed to sparkle with impish delight as he gave a decisive nod, setting the toy on the ground in front of him. A dark purple power surged and flickered around him for a moment, as he raised a single hand into the air. The doll's tail sprang to life, flicking side to side in a hypnotic manner. A word escaped the teen's lips as he named off his technique before results were shown. Waterja. A huge globe of water exploded into existence above the training area, easily 50 feet in diameter. It hovered for a bit, before twisting and twining into a 100-foot-long water dragon, twisting through the air and knocking over a few trees with slight flicks of its tail. The doll's tail slammed downward in front of it, but didn't harm the ground as Naruto snapped his fingers, the near maroon aura flaring into existence for a moment. Another word slipped into the air, before the water changed again. Blizaya. The water dragon exploded into a shower of rain, before freezing into hundreds of thousands of ice needles, impacting the training area's earth without even a sound, a testament to how sharp they were to slip in without much resistance. They all slipped back out, leaving tiny pinpricks where they were, before slamming into each other and forming a large prism out of ice that hovered into the air before dropping to the ground. As soon as it made contact, the area around the prism flash froze, turning grass to ice, before it exploded into a shower of glass-like shards, dissolving into the air as the grass thawed. Naruto gave a wistful smile at the sight, remembering Haku's ability, and her subsequent hint of unlocking fusion elements. He quickly moved on to the next element, clearly aware that there were another 2 observers hidden in the trees. He felt no malicious intent from them, and allowed them to continue to watch as he brought both arms above his head, the doll mimicking his actions with its tails. The purple aura reappeared, darkened slightly more, before dissipating, as he brought both arms in a vicious downward motion together. The word that escaped his mouth was nearly lost in the effects following it. Thunderjaw. Through the bright clear sky, 15 lightning bolts, easily 2 feet thick, collided with each other over 30 feet above their heads before combining and slamming into the earth below them. The white beam of energy easily 10 feet across, and even a foot or 2 thick. He toned down the electrical charge that escaped the ground so that he didn't give anyone more than a minor shock of the electricity, but the ground was unable to contain it all and exploded where struck. An echoing boom rattled the leaves in the trees in the wake of the lightning bolt. Without missing a beat, he moved to the next spell, turning to an unoccupied set of trees before delivering a swift palm thrust, accentuated by the movements of his doll, as well as his mana springing to life for a moment. Eroja. Slicing gusts of wind shredded well over 50 trees into something akin to the consistency of sand, the poor bark never standing a chance to the incredibly precise blades of wind hidden within the storming gale that completely surrounded the trees. Taking aim at a place that wouldn't be too destructive, he released his second-to-last elemental spell, the purple aura staying after this one as he really needed the power for the last. Faraja. Over 100 feet above them in the air, the sky combusted into a brilliant explosion of white-hot fire, spreading easily at least 30 feet in every direction before imploding on itself, as he didn't wish for the forest to catch fire. The purple aura was nearly black as it twisted and twined about him, and he raised both hands up before slamming them onto the ground, the doll miming every movement. Quakea. The earth groaned and cracked in protest to the spell, before hundreds of thousands of branching spears of earth erupted from the ground. They only stayed for a moment, though, before disappearing, and the earth returned to how it was before the sparring ever even started, all the craters and dents filled from the added power to the spell. The black mage turned to the shell-shocked green Junin, his doll smirking at the 2, unnoticed, others within the trees before hopping into the blonde's arms. The teen raised an elegant blonde eyebrow, not looking winded in the least at his inhuman display, before asking his question. "Is that all you needed to see? I can do a few more things, but I'd rather not. Not even my earth manipulation can restore the destruction of the ability I used at the end of my C rank. It's hard enough to contain that technique and not allow it to affect anything that isn't caught in it, and the poor trees have suffered enough today." Guy nodded a little, his 3 genin were almost falling out of the tree at the awesome power displayed. The Junin was greatly relieved that he didn't fight the boy in all-out combat, as the abilities displayed were quite destructive. He wasn't joking when he said he specialized in widespread demolition. The 2 bystanders, still unnoticed to all but Naruto, nodded to each other before disappearing. The blonde, as if remembering why he first came here, struck an elaborate thinking pose, the doll hopping to his head and lying there motionlessly, before he asked a question that had the genin team falling out of the tree and flat on their faces. "I also wanted to ask where you bought your spandex suits, as I believe Hitaki-san could do with the youthfulness that they provide. I also wish to, as he seems to have a grudge against me, deprive him of his mask and bear witness to the mystery of the world known as Hitaki Kakashi's face." If nothing else, it will serve as blackmail material should he try to set me up with a potentially fatal enemy again. Guy was once again shocked at how unyouthful his rival was being, all for a simple grudge. He was trying to get his own student killed? He couldn't detect a lie from the blonde young man, and that scared him. It meant his rival truly was blinded by uncalled for hatred and anger at this boy over nothing and was using his status as the blonde's sensei to try to get him killed. It was at that moment that the eternal rivalry between Guy and Kakashi ended, as the guy in green found that the rival he had been competing against seemed to have, indeed, fallen from grace. Guy told the blonde where the store was that sold the spandex bodysuits he always wore, also politely asking the boy if he would mind stopping by his apartment sometime so that they could discuss his hand-to-hand style, as Guy was incredibly interested in it, and would want to write down how to correctly train a person in the style. Naruto's lips quirked upwards in a semblance of a slight smile and nodded to the taijutsu master. He didn't mind the man all that much, really, despite the exuberance and youthfulness. The man had some honor, held a strict code of morals, and wouldn't use the knowledge gained from the black mage for selfish reasons. With the location of where the spandex could be bought ascertained, Naruto sat against the trunk of a tree that hadn't been felled, and listened to Guy's lesson plan. He could wait a bit to remove Kakashi's mask. He really was interested in this teamwork theory that Kakashi always talked about, right before he pandered to Sasuke's every whim and ignored both him and Sakura. He watched as Team 9 practiced under Guy's watchful eye, slightly surprised at what they were able to do. He did have to put up with Neji's curious, yet still haughty, gaze when the Hyuga turned on his Byakugan, as he was unable to see Naruto's chakra coils, or any chakra whatsoever, as well as the red energy seeming to be stored within the doll on his head. Naruto simply shrugged his shoulders and used the end-all-be-all excuse of excuses. Bloodline thing. They'd buy it, usually, though Guy was looking quite suspicious and thoughtful. Naruto would play a little with Kyuubi while they were practicing and training, doing his own, unique, training. It nearly gave Neji a heart attack to see a 1/10 scale model of him, shiny hair and everything, created as a golem of earth, though with realistic coloring and details. Tenten had thought it was cute, and had glomped it, squealing slightly. Naruto knew not to say anything about that, as he was certain she was hiding pointy objects somewhere, just waiting to throw them at anything that dare call her a fangirl. Lee thought it was youthful, however, once he finally set up his little training playground in front of him and the Kyuubi toy. There were 4 figures each doing something different, each created out of a different element that corresponded with their personalities. Neji was cold, unforgiving, unmovable in his views, and stoic, so he was an earth golem. Tenten was piercing, striking with deadly accuracy, and had a bipolar personality. She was focused and unflinching in a fight, but slightly bubbly and humble off the battlefield, so she was lightning. Lee was effervescent, always here or there, but never anywhere for long. His fighting style of Goken focused on straightforward strikes, but he combined it with a bit of acrobatics to slowly mold the style to fit him and his personality. He was a wind golem. Finally there was Guy. He seemed to also be bipolar, in a different way. He was youthful and exuberant on or off the field, but when faced with something potentially threatening or something he was highly interested in, he became serious and focused. He molded his students into powerful shinobi, yet was able to keep their clashing views from causing much infighting. He was gentle when he needed to be, yet incredibly powerful when the time demanded it. He was a water golem. The Lee and Neji golems were sparring in perfectly imitated versions of their taijutsu styles, with the Guy golem yelling in a grand imitation of the instructor to have the Tenten golem improve their evasion by throwing projectiles at them. He wanted her to miss by exactly 1 centimeter, should they be unable to move out of the way, and the Tenten golem did exactly that. Guy had come over to inspect the faux battlefield, and he was surprised at how accurate everything was. When he asked what Naruto was doing, the boy had given him a rather interesting answer. Well, I spend my free time improving not only my control, so that I may someday use my ultimate technique without harming anything I don't want to, but I also work on fusion between elements. You saw a glimpse of that when I showed you each of my elements, as I had gotten a hint from a powerful woman with the Hyeten, ice element, bloodline on how to mix wind and water to create ice. I was able to use it before, but it took an immense amount of force to create the element, and now the ice element is coming quite a bit better with her help. The final thing I'm working on is seeing if I can create working automatons through my manipulation. Before our C-rank mission, I was able to create about 5-inch tall figures, and a perfect replica of my doll, but this is how far I've come now. It also helps that I have a photographic memory, allowing me, should I wish to simply see the entirety of a fighting style just by one viewing. I refuse to pick apart other people's fighting styles, though, and refuse to use my memory to create a variation of the Sharingan. I find that stealing from your comrades is one of the worst things possible, so I use the stored knowledge in a rather interesting way. I have my golems replicate what I've seen, and if I'm near people I've remembered something from, I'll sit back and see if they can find anything to help themselves from seeing their likeness in pitched combat. Think of it as this. I'm always recording everything that I'm seeing, and I dislike the thought of becoming like Hitaki-san, so I use my gift to help others. Instead of teaching stolen techniques, I use the knowledge to allow people to view themselves in the third person, and be able to better their own training by seeing how they fight. Guy was rather astonished at this, as it was a great use of something like that. He could clearly see how the teen's memory could be considered a curse, given how he had seen how Kakashi acted with his copying eye. Neji, Lee, and Tenten were struck between awe and slight endearment. It was a rather obscure, yet highly useful ability, and the blonde had found a way to not let the knowledge to go to waste, yet not really do anything with it besides allow other people to view themselves and hone techniques. They watched their respective golems, and realized that it was, indeed, a near-perfect replication of each of their ways of fighting. They sat down to watch themselves for a few minutes, each picking up a few things they could work on the next day from watching the miniatures fight. Tenten was quite curious as to how Mini Tenten got all her weapons, and Naruto gave a slight smirk and a cryptic reply. The wonders of elemental manipulation know no bounds, Tenten-san. Guy immediately caught on to what he was saying, and vowed to himself to teach the three their respective elemental affinities. Before long, their training session was over, and Naruto bid them a farewell before vanishing in a flurry of ice crystals, which held in the air for a moment, twinkling and sparkling, before evaporating as well. Kakashi's house. Hitaki Kakashi was currently taking a light nap, as his brooding at the memorial stone had taken a lot out of him. He wasn't a natural at angst, like Inari or Sasuke, but he really had great things to angst about. First was his old teammate, Uchiha Obito, who died and gave him his Sharingan eye. He had died in a rockslide, and Kakashi felt it was his fault, as if he had simply agreed to go rescue Rin earlier. Perhaps the stone nens wouldn't have caught them unawares with the rockslide technique. Secondly was his other teammate, Inuzuka Rin. She had been captured by stone nens, and his own stubbornness at wanting to finish the mission instead of saving her came at a heavy price. She was severely injured from her escape attempt by the time he had come to save her, and she only lasted long enough to use a medical jutsu to fully transplant Obito's eye into Kakashi's socket before dying from blood loss. Finally was his sensei, Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime. He had given his life to seal the demon away about 15 years ago, and Kakashi blamed the Jinchuriki for his sensei's death. The fox was the most powerful of the Biju. Surely the container had to have been corrupted by its influence? Of course, the idea that the seal was absolutely foolproof, seeing as how his sensei was a brilliant man with seals, never crossed his mind, and he blamed it all on the Jinchuriki. Then that new blonde student of his has the gall to have a Kyuubi doll around him, and even uses it in a fight. Apparently, without the trademarked blue eyes and whisker marks on his cheeks, Naruto was damn near unrecognizable. Due to Kakashi's pure laziness, he had never even bothered to learn the Jinchuriki's name, simply knowing that it was the fox container by gold hair, blue eyes, and whisker marks. Also due to his uncaring nature when it came to anything besides the Uchiha, he really didn't care that almost everyone else in the village knew that his student was that same Jinchuriki, as every time someone brought it up to him he was too busy with his porn to notice. Eventually the man will grow a working brain, or so we must hope. He was currently mulling over his thoughts on how his student had gold hair, purple eyes, had a Kyuubi doll. His abilities didn't use chakra it seemed, and he was the correct age to match the Jinchuriki before it disappeared. Kyuubi had red eyes. Blue plus red equals purple? Right as he made the connection, he was distracted from his train of thought as an odd draft was felt across his face. That's odd. I always have my mask on, so the only way I could feel a draft is if. He bolted up in bed, eyes wide in the darkness of his bedroom. He removed the Hite-8 from his head, allowing his Sharingan eye to hopefully pierce the darkness, but was blinded before he could see who removed his mask by a bright flash of white light. Several other flashes followed it, as well as the telltale, click, sound of a camera going off. He blinked rapidly to clear his vision and horribly mangle whoever was the newest attempter on seeing his unmasked face, but by the time his vision returned to normal, the only trace of his assailant was a single snowflake fluttering in the breeze. He vowed to find who was able to figure out what he looked like, destroy the camera, and destroy all copies of those pictures. He was just about to go into berserker frenzy when his thoughts strayed back to where they were going. His blonde student that he so hated was the Jinchuriki. He had more cause to kill him now, and would be hailed as a hero for it. He was nearly giddy with that news, and promptly forgot the intruder who saw his face as he started to plan on how he would get his student killed. Good thing he never taught the demon anything, though his powers were already great. Just more proof that the fox was manipulating the child. Let's leave him to his delusions, shall we? Back with Naruto. Naruto appeared in the Hokage's office in a swirl of delicate snowflakes, startling the Junin meeting currently in place. He really couldn't care the fuck less right now, because he had pictures of Kakashi's face, and nothing could ruin the good mood. Not even the unnatural amount of hate coming from most of the Junin in the room. He strode purposefully up to the Hokage, before tapping his temple and creating a transparent screen out of pure mana on the wall behind his desk. His first words shocked the room to the core. I have come from my self-imposed SSS class mission, Hokage-sama, and I was successful. I have physical as well as mental proof of what the fuck Hitaki-san looks like under that mask. Allow me to show you from my memory what he looks like, while I wait for the pictures to be ready for printing. The screen flickered a little, before an image appeared on it. It was Hitaki Kakashi, devoid of mask or Hite-8, eyes wide and unseeing. The scar across his left eye was quite prominent, but nobody was caring about that. The man's face was absolutely perfect. Unmarred skin, pale from lack of sunlight, adorned where the face mask usually covered, with only a tan line marking where the mask usually was. Many of the Junin kunoichi were staring in shock, awe, and a little bit of lust of the perfect face. They didn't really care that the demon was the one to finally complete the mission, as he had completed it and there were results. Two notable exceptions were Yuhi Kurenai, Genjutsu Mistress, and Mitarashi Anko, Snake Mistress and Torturer Extraordinaire. They were glancing at Naruto with a little bit of awe, as well as a tiny bit of regret. Naruto really couldn't care less at the moment, though, as he let the image hang in the air for a few seconds before dissipating back to his mind. He nodded politely to the shell-shocked room before giving the Hokage a slight bow and making a polite exit. I am sorry for interrupting your meeting, Hokage-sama, but I felt that as it was such a momentous occasion, you could forgive this intrusion. He disappeared into thin air after relaying that, his shunshin even more dramatic than ever. As he disappeared, a swirl of ice prisms about the size of half a kunai ascended upwards in his wake. They all refracted the light in a brilliant array across the room, before shattering with a slight tinkling sound, and evaporating. Quite a few, after getting over their shock of seeing Kakashi's face, had their jaws on the floor from such an elaborate technique. The control, as well as the elemental manipulation, to achieve that feat was enormous. One Junin, however, stood apart from the rest. He was newly released from Anbu after serving the standard 4-year term, and his name was Tenzo, though he preferred to go by Yamato. His thoughts were on the track of, if he was able to recreate Hayaten, would he also be able to recreate Mokuton, wood element? The ex-Anbu decided he might have a little chat with Naruto on the possibilities of that. He didn't really care if the boy was a Jinchuriki or not, as the bloodline of the Shodem Hokage had two parts. One was the wood element, and the second was the ability to repress a demon's influence. If the teen tried anything using his demon's power, he'd just suppress it with his power, and he was positive he could fight off the boy if he wasn't using the Kyuubi. That night, Naruto snuck inside Kakashi's house with the grace of a cat, making absolutely no sounds. He used a mana construct to hide him from sight, and was able to disperse his smell throughout the area to prevent anyone from pinpointing his location by nose. With 3 of the 5 senses taken out, and he highly doubted he would be licked by the Junin. It left only touch, which was easily avoided. He stole quickly through the area, making no trail as he moved. He was certain this was even more dangerous than depriving the man of his mask, but it had to be done. He got to the area where he needed to be, the bedroom. He snuck through the doorway, pausing a little to make sure the man's breathing was even as he slept. He continued to the closet, and reached out with a steady hand. After making his alterations to the man's clothing, he headed to his final and definitely most risky task. The doll on his head was almost hyperventilating from the suspense, and Naruto decided he would have to use a sort of genjutsu instead of a physical transformation. Using his mana, he wove an intricate spell pattern through the air, the violet light flickering for a moment before it faded, showing that the spell had been cast. He then sprinted out of there, making sure to not leave any trace behind. The next morning, 9 a.m., a deafening scream of, "No!" echoed across Konoha, and it would have woken them had the screamer been a bit earlier in the morning. Of course, Kakashi was always late to everything, even sunrise. Naruto, who was currently waiting with Sasuke and Sakura at Training Ground 7 messing with his golems, nearly snickered in delight. He was positive the man would be thoroughly humiliated today, as he had cast a spell on each of the spandex suits that would last a full 24 hours, would immolate any clothing that was worn over them, and would latch onto the man's skin like a leech, preventing him from removing one. And due to the disappearance of all his other clothing, it was either spandex until finding acceptable clothing, or a towel. But Kakashi wouldn't want to go outside in only a towel. He was hard-pressed to keep a straight face as his sensei arrived, face mask in place as he was too damn afraid of the man catching him should he try again to remove the mask. However, that was the only thing that was normal about his teacher. Hitaki Kakashi was wearing a green spandex bodysuit, which was quite form-fitting. Naruto absently noted to himself that he was a great judge of body to get the man's size correct on the first try. Kakashi's one eye was beaming intense rage at anything and everything in the vicinity, and it would have looked quite frightening if his gray hair wasn't done in a shiny bowl cut reminiscent of Maida Guy. The man's furious stare finally landed on him and his current project. He had a mini Konoha with pretty good details, and it was currently being destroyed by a Kyuubi made out of ice. He still wasn't up to par with his ice manipulation yet, as it was a relatively new element and had to be worked with a bit longer than his daily training with the others until he was just as proficient in it as he was in the others. Kakashi stormed up to his blonde student, intent on doing some kind of harm to him, as his newfound knowledge of the student's Jinchuriki status allowed him to blame anything and everything on him. He pointed an accusing finger at the 15-year-old, almost sputtering with rage as he yelled at the blonde. You did this to me." Naruto looked up, cocking a slightly questioning eyebrow. He let his eyes roam over his sensei's attire, and pulled a mock-innocent face as he replied. "Oh, how are you so positive of that, Hitaki-san? Do you have any proof?" Kakashi started to sputter incoherently, as it was just made clear that he really didn't know who did it, but he was positive he could blame the Jinchuriki. "I know you did it, you demon. You must have done it. You had to be jealous that Sasuke was getting better in his training than you were, and you tried to lash out at me for it." Naruto's lone eyebrow rose closer to his hairline at this statement. Even Kyuubi seemed to be giving the man a questioning stare. It seems that he finally figured it out. Who cares? He hated me before, he'll hate me even more now. Ah well. The teen stood slowly and gave the man a cold glare that made the ice golem of Kyuubi look like a boiling desert, nearly making the newly spandex-clad Junin step back in fright. But he was a Junin, and he wasn't going to let this demon intimidate him. "Hitaki-san, I advise you to quit making nonsensical accusations when you have no proof. I am actually quite a bit stronger than you, so as I can defeat you in combat, I really couldn't care less with what you teach Sasuke. I am quite annoyed that you would believe I would stoop so low as to lash out at you, as you put it. However, your face mask is quite null and void at this point, as it seems someone has infiltrated your home, and was able to get quite a few pictures of your face underneath the mask. They seem to have spread all around the village, and I believe I hear your fan club coming now." The stampeding of footsteps started to shake the ground, as a loud squeal of "Kakashi-kun" rent the air, causing all to tremble in terror. Kakashi swiftly forgot all about his hatred of his student, and handed 3 Chunin exam applications to Sasuke, telling him he nominated the team, Red. Nominated Sasuke but had to nominate Sakura and Naruto as it was a team-oriented exam, for the Chunin exams, and that they would start in about a month. He then took off, hoping that he could outrun his mob of fan people. Naruto walked up to Sasuke's still shocked form, took a paper out of it, and disappeared in a swirl of snowflakes, headed towards Training Grounds 27. Training Grounds 27. Naruto arrived in his own teleportation spell with his lips slightly turned upwards in a smirk. He headed straight to Guy, tapped a finger against his own temple once, before a large screen was brought to life in the air. A still image of Kakashi's new look on it for Team 9 to see. Neji stifled a snicker, Tenten burst out into laughing, and Guy and Lee started to hug each other, proclaiming that Kakashi had discovered his youthfulness at long last. He felt someone was watching him intensely, so he decided to find out who, and bid a farewell to the team before disappearing in a gust of Arctic wind, giving the entire team a brief chill. He reappeared in the surrounding forest, the same gust of freezing wind accompanying him as he appeared a few feet to the side of a Junin who was spying on him. He decided that he was in a good mood and wouldn't harm the man, yet, unless he didn't have a good reason to be spying on him, that is, and voiced his question. "Why, exactly, are you spying on me, Junin-san?" Yamato, the spy, blinked rapidly in surprise at being discovered before regaining his composure. At least the teen had a bit of respect, though it was obvious he was suspicious of being spied on. He had heard a little about the fighting abilities of the blonde, due to Kakashi's lazy drawl at all the meetings he had been to, but most of the copy Nin's speeches tended to be about how Sasuke was progressing. Deciding that he might as well get straight to the point, he answered as truthfully as possible. "I had seen your ability to create the fusion element of ice during the Junin meeting yesterday, and was wondering if you were able to create any others." Naruto was a bit surprised at this, as he hadn't detected any malice from the man while he was speaking, and he seemed genuinely interested. He gave a slight shrug before answering the man, as it was a decent reason to be spying on him, though he would warn him to not attempt it again if he was fond of living. "I have not been able to recreate the others to my satisfaction, so I await people with the respective bloodlines to the fusion elements to give me advice on how to combine the two. I had met a Hayaten user on my C-rank mission, and she gave me the much-needed hint to make my ice manipulation viable. I can do a little of the other fusion elemental manipulations, but nothing satisfactory to me, so I don't use them often. I have trained as far as I can without learning exactly how the fusion element works, and until I find someone with the bloodline to assist with that, I have hit a glass ceiling." The Junin nodded a little, as it seemed logical enough, before making his decision. He gave a slight smile to the blonde, before disappearing in the standard whirl of leaves, his answer floating to the black mage on the wind. "I see. Well, I am Yamato, the sole user of Mokuton in Konoha. Should you be able to prove to me that you are worth it, I will give you information on how the wood element works. For now, though, I notice your ice manipulation still needs training, and I will wait for you to bring it up to par with your other elements before testing you." Naruto let a sly grin slip onto his face at this, and took it as a challenge. He disappeared in another shunshin, a large pillar of ice engulfing him before exploding into multiple shards of ice floating in the air, before they all evaporated. He would have to train a bit more than usual before the Chunin exams, he decided. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.